Ba da da dee da 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 dee da 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 dee. We'll go sailing. Ba da ba bum. Ba da 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 dee 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 dee. Da 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 dee da 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 dee. Da 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 dee. We'll go sailing. Hello, everyone. Hopefully this is working. Hopefully this is working. And hopefully you can all hear me and all see what's coming up. We've got currently up, today's topic is, broadly speaking, hunting submarines. And it's, of course, live from Cameron, the integrated ASW and all those things. And, well, yeah. I'm pretty happy. I am live to you on both Twitch and YouTube, which is always fun. I have Iron Brew. This is the last bottle of Iron Brew I have in the house, mainly because I keep trying to order multiple Iron Brews and they're not letting me. I have a Senior Fluffy Research Assistant, mainly because the other Fluffy Research Assistant has decided that he prefers Strictly Come Dancing, is it? What is it, Mount? You're not sure, you just don't want to be anywhere near it. Okay. You decided you'd prefer to be with Papa at the front of the house, trying to bury yourself in roof insulation, than be out there. And hello, everyone. Hello. How are we all doing? I hope you're enjoying yourself. Hello, Needap 0078. Hope you'll enjoyed it. Today's topic is hunting submarines, and it's very, very much it's focused in on the ASW aircraft and how we use long-range maritime patrol aircraft to work with submarines and ships. And basically, to get around all the various rules around this topic, I'm doing this as a historical progression. I'm showing you how it's developed over history. So, yeah. Nah. I don't think... He's just been out. It's more a case of he wants biscuits. If you haven't been here before, it's Nida Poo, mate. I've just realised what your name spells. It does. That's very clever. Although I didn't realise it at all. This is the trouble. I spend my day dealing with people with things which are so named letters and numbers that I don't process it. Yeah. We're on Twitch as well. And we do both. We do both. Now, the poodle, you asking for biscuits. Look, no, we haven't been live long enough for them to be telling you that you need anything around. So, just behave, okay? Keep looking at me. You've already had yours this evening. Okay, very cute. So, hello everyone. How are you doing? People get offended easily these days. Need up. And the only reason I'm saying need up rather than the full is because honestly, someone will clip it. Oh. PT. Okay. And Leslie and Stafford in YouTube. Everyone's putting in PT for the poodle get through. You have this audience far too well trained. So yes, today's discussion is all about submarines. It's all about anti-submarine warfare, how you hunt them, what you hunt them with, all those sort of things. And it's a fun topic. It is a fun topic, but we are going to be being careful, and we are going to be starting off right back at the beginning. Right back in World War I, when the first air search and how those are integrated in and how those systems work. And then we're going to bring it right up to the present day. And we're going to talk the whole way through about the systems and what they do. But I am going to admit this now. I'm going to keep this at certain points. I'm going to go quite high level because of reasons of I don't want to give anything away. How do I put this? I spent far too much time in my life sitting around on anti-submarine warfare frigates, hearing people chat way through things, and I'm always scared. So I'm going to just do this as best I can from a historical perspective. Or he licks the chair again. Yeah, he is licking the chair again. He's already doing that, Michael Cooch. Now, to be honest, this topic really does fit with what I've been working on to do with the Australia trip, because, of course, the Australia trip was all about Castlemaine, it's all about Diamantina, which is coming out on Monday. It's all of that. And yeah, it's fun. You literally got food, you've been in the garden, you're not getting any more. Not happening. As cute as you are, no more. We don't War Thunder on the channel. Pretty much, that's it. We do not War Thunder on this channel. Nope, you're not. Nope. Not happening. Not happening. Go arrest. So, to start off with, submarines World War I. It's worthwhile thinking about this when it begins, because the fact is, aircraft and submarines both come into service at rather a similar amount of time. So it's rather obvious that one's going to be looked at to counter the other. This is there are interesting parallels going on with our own world. People start saying, this weapon's a war-winning weapon, and you look at, well, the trouble is the technology's already been coming along to actually integrate and develop and work against it. When we talk about drones today, well, lasers have been in development and coming, next generation thing coming through for a long time. And frankly, for a laser to kill a drone, especially the smaller ones, is often a lot easier than for them to kill a larger aircraft. Because the moment you start hardening a drone against a laser's impact, and you can do that, the drone is going to grow in size and expense. And very soon your cheap drone, which is this cheap weapon system, which is, so cheap and so plentiful, is going to not be so cheap and so plentiful, because it's going to be far more difficult to build because of the dealing with the weapons it's up against. And it's rather the same with submarines. Submarines have this wonderful capability. They are, realistically in World War I, they are torpedo boats which can submerge. They are not what we would consider submarines like today. One of the interesting questions I was fielding a couple of weeks ago was, when I was talking about submarines World War I, someone hadn't really realised there were submarines in World War I, which was a shock to me, but that's the UK education system sometimes. And the other question, the question that came up was, well, how many months could they do underwater? How long could they stay underwater for? And I went, you can measure it in hours. Hours is pretty much it. And they can't go fast underwater. We're talking 3-4 knots, maximum 7 knots, realistically, underwater. They are designed to cruise the world above the water, and when they see a threat or there's a big storm, they batten down hatches and submerge. That's it. That's pretty much the fun thing of it. Now, this means that in World War I, the task for air search is very different than today. Because the submarines you're dealing with are very different. It's much the same in World War II. When we talk about why are aircraft such a threat to submarines in World War II, when there's no sonobuoys and none of those things, it's because the submarines basically are submersible torpedo boats. They duck underwater for cover. They do not go underwater for a long time. They do not spend a long time underwater. They're not particularly good underwater, not particularly maneuverable, they're not particularly agile. They can't do a long range underwater. Honestly, when they submerge, there's just a clock ticking on them. And yes, that can be advantageous. They can deploy mines underwater and scoot in close and deploy the mines underwater and then get out. But if you want them to lay in wait as ambush predators with torpedoes, then I have to be very sorry to you. World War I submarines are not where it's at. They can do it, but it ain't going to be a long ambush. It ain't going to be a long wait. And a lot of the systems we associate with them staying down longer in World War II are what are developed in World War I and in the 1920s and 30s. That's what they're there for. That's what they're developed with. But that doesn't make them not a non-viable weapon. That doesn't make them not a useful system. They are an absolutely devastating system. And it's a reason they come closer in World War I to potentially achieving victory than they do in World War II. And that is quite literally because, honestly, the world was less prepared for them. It couldn't be as prepared for them in World War One. It hadn't seen them on this scale before. Submarines had been interesting little additions. They'd been oddities. They'd been something which was sort of looked at and going, well, this could be. And one of the fun things is when people take quotes from admirals in about 1906, 1907, discussing submarines, and then apply them to World War II doctrines, and go, well, this shows these people didn't understand submarine warfare. And you go, well, no, look at the submarines in 1904, 1905, 1906. Look at what they actually were capable of doing. And then look at that admiral and go, was he not right? Because at that point, they probably were terrible. It's kind of like aircraft. They're frigging terrible. It's one of the joys of doing my PhD thesis on the 1920s and 30s and development of naval aviation is when I realised and was able to express in a conference a couple of times, and probably will be doing that at a conference again soon, that naval aviation comes of age in World War II because aircraft in the 1920s and 30s go for a rapid development in terms of their weaponry and their ability to carry that weaponry. And there's even the fact that in 1939, realistically, the ship-killing weapon for aircraft is the torpedo. The bombs might do damage, they might, and if they're a lightly built vessel, then they will. But a major warship? No, it's going to be the torpedoes. But by the end of the war, they've got bombs which can do damage, even to the most heavily armed warships. They might not sink them, but they can do heavy enough damage that they're going to cause it problems with the bombs. Add in torpedoes, and well, you've got a lot of problems. So yeah. Submarines in World War One, they are a threat. And they do require aircraft as part of the problem to deal with them. But they're not the same threat as we're dealing with today. So whilst I'm going to start off by talking about World War One and talking about the things that happened in World War One, I'm not, and I repeat this, I'm not going to end there. Because World War One is the beginning point. And most of what you've seen, most of what we have today, is evolutions and adjustments of things that have adapted to the technology. And that's, again, this further proof of the concept that when new technology comes through, it very rarely revolutionizes war. In fact, you can make the case about aircraft. They are really long-range artillery. That's what they are. They are reconnaissance, they are artillery, they are this new way of doing these things, which have already been done, but this can do it better and over a longer range. You can make that point. And it's the same with submarines when they come in. What are they? We could say they're a torpedo boat, and that's a new version of torpedo, but making holes in ships to sink them has been a long-running thing of mines, and then they've got torpedo. You must remember, the original torpedo was a mine, and then they added the Whitehead developed a system which allowed it to be give it locomotion, give it motion, so that became the torpedo we understand it as. And it's the same with a lot of systems. They evolve, and then our counters evolve to them. So, with that being said, I thought that to find a submarine, you just shouted down a pipe, and if the other guy answers back, you dropped a depth charge on it. Ooh, I wish it was that easy. I wish that worked. It works so well in cartoons. It works so well in cartoons. Hello, we excited. We excited. You've realised Papa's excited, so you're excited. Calm down. You want lap time, do you? Oh, friggin'. You never used to be quite so demanding of lap time when we were in the smaller office. Why is it in the big office you demand lap time all the time? Oh, yeah. Yeah, there you go. Calm down. Good boy. Wow. Okay. Please note, and I do apologise, Puppy's been not very happy today because he's had to be locked up all day because we've had workers in the house. And as we all know, dogs don't like it when they're in one room all day. Even if you put them out and you keep them company and you take them for walks, they don't like it. So he's not exactly the happiest fluff. So that being said, how does anti-submarine warfare begin? Well, basically it starts off with this. In 1915, which is this area map, the Germans start doing unrestricted submarine warfare. It sort of began before then, but it starts really at this point. At this point that they start to consider, oh frigate, we have problems. Now, luckily, things had already really started off in the ASW category. One of the things they'd realised quite early on, and the Royal Navy realises, was that if they used search aircraft with a long range, to fly over water, they could search large areas and they can make submarines dive. Because you don't require that much to damage them and to make them being able to get home virtually impossible. So, if you can make them dive, if you force them down, that also is a mission kill. Because if submarine's below the water, it can't really follow anything. Unless something comes right up to it, it doesn't have much of a chance to engage it. So, actually damaging a submarine, forcing it home, or leaving it on the surface so that it can get attacked by a surface vessel, that's a win. But also, it's a mission kill if you can force it to submerge. And if you can go home and tell people, yeah, there was a submarine there. And so they can send something into that area. So ASW begins, first off, with binoculars, actually. It begins with people looking, because submarines have to spend so much of their time on the surface. They have to spend so much time on their surface that that's not only their weakest spot, that's also the way they're most likely to be detected. And by the way, this continues into World War II, when often submarines are detected by radar. They're detected by surface search radar, and there's... Quiet. Calm down. Okay? Submarines are detected by radar, they are detected as their periscopes are detected. They are being observed because they are being so much on the surface. They are having to be so much on the surface because that's their more natural habitat. So until you get on to basically the Royal Navy's U-class and the German Type 21s, Type 22s, submarines, and Type 21s, Type 23s as well. I think it's 23s, not 22s. Don't think 22s get built, do they? I'll check that out later. But those vessels are far more orientated for underwater work. They are the vessels being designed around working underwater. The U-class have that benefit because the Royal Navy designs them for coastal waters and training and manoeuvre in shallow water environments, i.e. the Mediterranean and other areas. And because they are small and nippy, and that's what they want them to be. But that's World War II. World War I, well, the U-boats and the Royal Navy submarines in this period, they're all equally the same. They all like to spend their lives above the water. They want to spend their lives on the surface. Yes, they have torpedoes, but they think about using their guns a lot. And, well, to give you an example, they're often applying things like this. And you can actually buy this book. It's The Laws and Usage of War at Sea. I have to say, this is the American version produced, but it's an interesting read. It's very much an interesting read, and it was produced in 1900. So this is from 1900, that document, and you can now buy it on Amazon. Now, the whole point of the Flagg-class sloop and diesel systems that are coming in is most of this warfare, most of what you're seeing in this area of submarine zone, yes, they can attack merchant vessels, unescorted merchant vessels. They can attack all sorts of things on the surface. This is also the area they can lay mines. And mines have been basically a problem from 1914 onwards. Submarines laying mines. And occasionally they're doing torpedo attacks, and yes, those can be quite lethal. They can be quite lethal, but they're also sometimes a bit farcical, because the torpedoes and the submarines themselves are still getting used to what systems they need to use. Now, at a certain point, I would say about mid-1915, when you've got unrestricted submarine warfare going on and all these sorts of things, the Royal Navy realises that hang on, they need to do something to make it less palatable for merchant vessels to be attacked. So they can't come with the idea of Q ships. And that's why batch 3, as we really want to think of them, of the Flower class sloop. Please note, Flower class sloop. Talking World War I, World War II, they're Flower class corvettes. Handle the trick of if you want to want to check if you're in a world war or one might be coming. The Royal Navy start naming small vessels after flowers. It's one of the signs of there's a war. The other one is that the Germans start building something which is an 88mm. Doesn't matter what kind of gun it's for, or rocket, or system. It's an 88mm. For some reason, the Germans, the moment they start to hear the sounds of drums and the marching and the tenor in their voice of that scenario, they get attracted to 88. Do not know why. Maybe it's the double infinity sign. No idea. But the Royal Navy get attracted to Flower class. The Germans get attracted to the 88. The British Army always seem to get attracted to a 6-pounder of some kind. No idea why again, but it's always a 6-pounder of some kind seems to come out. The US tends to start announcing they're developing new artillery systems. There are all these little signs you can look for. Oh, frigate! They're far more reliable than just political arguments going on. They had lots of ideas about how to deal with submarines, they really did, but basically at this point it boils down to 3 things. 1, they're either searching to get them underwater. 2, they're trying to surprise them with a Q ship. The whole idea being, well, you turn up and you turn up and you think you've got a nice juicy merchant ship, and as you're getting closer, maybe some of them seem to dive off into lifeboats to get away from you, and you think, oh good, we've got a really sexy kill, and then when you're too close it opens up and goes boom 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 boom, and you suddenly realize your little pop-pop is against a dozen little pop-pops and they're all firing at you. That's the whole idea of the Q ship. Basically it's to make you feel scared. But that leads to the submarines actually relying on torpedoes more and ironing out some of the kinks of their torpedoes, which doesn't necessarily help. But please note how one side begets the other developing, and you can just keep having this race. So at that point, they start going. The data comes in, and well, convoys are introduced. Convoys are introduced about 1917. Famously, the paper is written by the future Third Sea Lord, Reginald Henderson. It's a very, very good paper. It's written on the instructions of Jellicoe, who then takes Henderson's name off it to protect Henderson from officers who disagree with the concept of convoy upon their honour. This is the same system which the Royal Navy's introduced in the Napoleonic Wars and everything else, but you know, suddenly the convoys become a dishonourable thing, something which you don't need to do and is just going to destroy the Navy because it's going to turn them into just, you know, sheepdogs guarding a herd. And you can't get merchant vessels to sail in convoy. They just don't have the skills or the rhythm to be able to do it. And of course you can, and you do. But then these ships and their minesweeping brethren, large number of them become convoy escorts, carrying their weapons openly. And they are the long-range escorts. They're the ones which take the vessels out into the far deeps of the Atlantic. What tends to happen is they tend to have aircraft up searching. They're also listening for communication systems and you know, comms and any radio transmissions from the German submarines possible to try and isolate their positions and route convoys around them. But aircraft and sort of electronics, you know, radio monitoring, all these things of what they're doing. But ultimately, they also have these. And then the moment they get into this sort of zone around around basically the UK and in the Mediterranean, that's when they usually get picked up by a local escort group, which will be maybe some destroyers. Maybe some older destroyers or something like that will come and join in these forces. Will come and join in the escorting and will help them get and make sure try and get them to harbour. Now, the interesting thing is, if you look at the top graph, there is a differential between what the Germans estimated they were sinking and what they were actually sinking. And the trouble is, this was a differential a long way through the war. And the German Navy, the Kaiserliche Marine, were promising to sink, as you can see, quite a lot. They said they would sink 600,000 tons of ships, merchant vessels, every month. They only achieved that or greater in 4 months in 1917. March, April, May, and June. And from then on, it never gets that high again. Now that's a problem. That is a problem, but that's mostly down to the fact that the submarines aren't getting opportunity. Opportunity cost. And I can explain where the opportunity cost is coming in from. The opportunity cost is coming from a rather intriguing area. It's coming from these. The first ASW aircraft. Now, they're called Felixstows because they're built in Felixstowe and operate from the Felixstowe Naval Air Station, which is a seaplane base. They start off by getting Curtiss Model H. Now, these aircraft have been sort of an Anglo-American project in that, whilst it was the Americans building them, they were being tacitly supported by the Royal Navy. There was even a Royal Navy officer involved. And the Model H's were their transatlantic boats. Their transatlantic flying boats. That meant they could cross the Atlantic. That was what they were being built to do. Which meant they had exceptionally long range, which was great for a search pattern. And this is where I'm going to introduce the first book for tonight's topic. This is called The Spider Web. Spider Web was published by Theodore Douglas Halleman, and it's the Royal Navy Air Service flying boat operations during the First World War by a flight commander involved. And it is quite literally exactly what it says. It is all about how they operate, how they carry out their plans, and the flights they do, etc., and how they're sort of constantly flying in these areas. And basically that means German submarines going through these areas are often forced underwater. They're often forced into positions where they don't want to be. And they develop a search pattern. It's called the Spider's Web. This is it. They literally fly out and the aircraft traces these patterns in the sky. They trace that. And that's sitting over a huge area. A huge area in front of the entrance to the English Channel. Anyone want to guess what that's part of? Yes, that's part of the Channel barrier. That's part of the Channel defences. And that's another reason why I say German High Seas Fleet wants to try and attack the Channel. They're going to have trouble. They want to try and force the Channel. They're going to have trouble. Because one of the interesting things about these flying boats, and interesting things about operations, is they tend to be in the air from dawn till dusk. Now, airships weren't so effective as flying boats, and there was a reason for this. Airships, they either have to fly very high, in which case they're too high to really... They might see the submarine, but they're not going to do anything which is going to cause the submarine to hide itself underwater. Or alternatively, they're just not going to be able to go where they need to go. You need heavier than air aircraft for this kind of function in this period. And they do a good job. They do a good job. Hope that answers your question, old but bold. So yes, we have the Felixstowe F1, the Felixstowe F3, and the Felixstowe F2. Now, this is the most common during World War One. This is coming in at the end of World War One, and this is really represents a bump up in capability. But there is a reason why it's an F2 at the front here. The F2 is an absolutely gorgeous aircraft. It's incredibly reliable, and it's incredibly usable for its period. And it's one of those interesting scenarios where you sit there and you look at it and you go, why wasn't this incredible service maintained during the interwar period? Now, there is a classic problem here, in that whilst the Fleet Air Arm is a semi-joint service, even from its even from 1918 onwards, in that the Royal Navy is always in charge of observers and the Royal Navy is always overseeing and paying for it. Coastal Command, which is what these aircraft get operated into and pushed into, is not. Coastal Command is a command which entirely exists to cooperate with the Navy, which entirely exists to support the Navy and maritime operations, and yet it is no linking with the Navy. This is possibly explains the situation Britain gets into in the beginning of World War II, where frankly the Coastal Command is weak, and the arguably Fighter Command politically looks more to the Admiralty than they do to the Air Ministry to actually back them up when they're making the case for engines and horsepower. Because whilst during World War II, the Air Ministry suddenly discovers that the single-engine aircraft really needed 2,000 horsepower engines, so those engines which the Navy was developing for its own aircraft no longer can it have because they're absolutely necessary. Prior to that, all those developments, all those power developments, had to come from the Navy pushing. Often using evidence gathered by Fighter Command as well as the Fleet Air Arm. Now, why am I talking mostly about the British in this scenario? Why haven't I mentioned the Americans or the French? And one reason is because the others don't have as much going on in the way of this operation, but also because in many ways the British go to the absolute extremes in developing and share their information. And a lot of the Allied assumptions going into the 20s and 30s were based on British wartime experience. Okay? The British shared the information with their Japanese counterparts, their French counterparts, the Italians, and with the Americans. A lot of it shared with the Americans because the Americans are building some of the flying boats for them sometimes. The Americans are doing a lot of helping out development work. Curtiss are especially involved. Curtiss and Submarine. The two groups who they really do look to for this. And they're useful. Without them, the Royal Navy would have been really up a creek without a paddle when it came to ASW. Because it didn't matter whether these aircraft were carrying a 250-pound bomb or not, whether they were armed to the teeth or had nothing, whether they had depth charges or nothing. What mattered was they would fly over the U-boats. They would fly over them as... well, if they were making an attack run, they'd try and make an attack run. But if they weren't, they'd probably try and machine gun them or something. Because they know they only have to damage the pressure hull just a little bit, and that submarine isn't getting home. Because you see, a U-boat or a submarine, its power, its ability, as I said, is a submersible torpedo boat. Its power, its safety, comes in being able to dive. Any damage that prevents it means it's trapped on the surface, at which point it becomes a very slow and very bad, difficult to maneuver torpedo boat trapped on the surface. And there is these things called torpedo boat destroyers, mostly these days just called destroyers, but torpedo boat destroyers which just love torpedo boats. They exist to kill them. And a one which is slow and trapped on the surface and can't move that much. Oh my, oh my. And that's before we get to the problem submarines often have with, if they're on the surface, the waves going over them and crashing over them. And that can cause huge trouble. So the last place a U-boat wants to be is stuck on the surface in the North Sea if it's mildly damaged. So it's safest thing they can do. The safest thing they can do the moment anything like this appears is dive. But they don't yet have the technology to stay down. And then in World War II, of course, the schnorkeler and other things developed to help them stay down. And that's when they really start developing other things. They start developing, well, sonobuoys and other systems. And this is the point of which you have to think about we're getting into modern submarine tech. It's towards the end of World War II, when you're finally getting out of really this era, where an all aircraft to be useful realistically had to do was scare the bejesus out of a submarine. Hence this book, Actung Swordfish, Merchant Aircraft Carriers, by Stanley Brand. And it's all about what you can get up to with a swordfish if you have absolutely no qualms and you want to scare the bejesus out of enemy submarines. And potentially sink them. It's a fun read. It's a fun read. If you read the two of them, though, it does, however, that you do start to get the idea that anti-submarine warfare between World War I and World War II really didn't have to move on that much. Because many of the hair-raising japes in this are pretty similar to the hair-raising tonics in this one. It's all fun. And yes, submarines are even slower underwater, as always. In this period. It's not like today where some submarines are actually faster when they are submerged than when they're on the surface. Because of the way their engines work and because of what they can do, because of the power that can come from their control surfaces when they're all fully submerged. And yeah, you know, there are Karl Gansberg. You've just given an example from 1915 where one of the Austro-Hungarians found a French submarine, and the Austro-Hungarians also are doing this, but they're not able to do this on the same scale. One of the things you have to remember is that the Royal Navy really does do this on a massive scale, and again, I cannot recommend The Spider's Web more. There's also a few other books I've got around me for World War One, naval aviation in World War One. But yes, The Spider's Web. This book, if you look it up, I should probably put a link down below to this one. I'll put a link down below to Spider's Web if anyone's interested in it. Oh, it's a good book. Hardcover is 90 odd quid, but the paper cover is £10, so that's what I'm going to share a link to. And I'll put that in the list of books. That should be down below in the description on YouTube. I will try and figure out how to stick it in the description on Twitch. can't seem to at the moment, but I'll try and figure something out. I'll put it in the chat. I'll put it in the chat on Twitch. But it's a really interesting guide if you want to read, if you want to early ASW warfare and how aircraft were used. Yep. So, yeah, Aircraft versus Submarines by Alfred Price is a good book. It is a good book, but it's not what I'm going to really put forward today, because the reason I'm going to is but I want to... That's sort of one-stop shop book, which is kind of cool, but I want to show you different books of the different sections today. So I've not put it in my book list today. Speaking of books, shameless book plug time. Woohoo! Where I say thank you to everyone for your kindness and your support of the channel. Thank you for helping the research be funded. Thank you for supporting with the Historiathon. That was really, really kind of you, and it's really raised, as I said, a lot of money, because it's going to support me publishing the first book next year with all the pictures that go into it and all the things for that. So that's going to be fun. And thank you to everyone who is, ongoing as a supporter on Patreon, or who's a member, who's a subscriber on Twitch, or all these things. Thank you. Thank you for everyone who comments in the channel, video, and all these things that helps promote it. I am still roughly 900 subscribers short. 900 subscribers short on this channel of the aim, of the targeted aim. And, yeah. I should probably do something about that. I should do something about being 900 subscribers short. For winning the bet with the aunt. But we're doing okay. Thank you, 853. Oh, good Lord. Sorry. That was just me sending out a reminder to some people to try and help. Thank you, 85 And I recommend you to come over today. Thank you, Seneca. But the stuff we got coming up also... Ooh, that'll be fun. Thank you, 85 what we've got coming up is we've got HMS Diamantina coming out on Monday. Tomorrow we have a key ships, which is HMS Tiger. Yeah, the key ships tomorrow is going to be HMS Tiger. I was doing Tiger Cubs video and I noticed I haven't done Tiger herself. I'm going to have to do her as a key ships. No, Michael Cooch, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing. 15k subscribers is not enough to make me watch Princess Bride. As I said, for me to watch Princess Bride, that's new kitchen time. Okay, there is a level to which I am not dropping. Okay, not dropping. And we've got the Monroe Doctrine Long Patrol on Saturday, and then we've got Brew Ships 174 on Sunday. So we've got a nice little stuff coming. We've got 2 historians next week. If you haven't seen it, that's been advertised. That is. Quiet. No. Down. Pussycat is not there to annoy you. Sorry, Pussycat walked a paw across his path. That's terrible, Pussycat, and We'll sort that. We'll sort that out. But yes, got a good lot of stuff coming out. 2 historians next week. It should be already advertised on the channel. It's all uploaded. It's all ready to go. It's going to be me and Professor Harry Bennett. I've got to modify the title a tad, but, you know, it went up and I went, oh, the title's gone up like that. Oh, I'll change that. Which HMS Tiger? 1913 HMS Tiger, the battle cruiser. So it's going to be a fun one. It will be a fun one. But no, next week should be quite fun. There's going to be also a premiere on Wednesday of World War I tribal class destroyers, which should be a lot of fun. There's a lot of good stuff coming up next week. So, with that being said, let's look at this today. We've got the question was very much phased around what is the stuff that we're dealing with today, and I thought, well, let's start off with the stuff which has been going on for a lot of time, where it's built up from, where the starting process is, what we're doing, how we're doing these things. Now, in the case of modern ASW warfare, it starts with information. It really does start with information. And there are many different sources of where you can get the information to build up your picture. So it might be satellites and reconnaissance like this. And like this can also carry electronic warfare, all sort of data pickup, all sort of signals which can be studied. And then we've got open source intelligence. The Bosphorus Naval News was a great source of open source intelligence. It stopped publishing in 2023, I think. But there are a few other sites like it. I use Bosphorus because I used to particularly enjoy them. They were a particularly good site, and Bosphorus Naval News, and they used to tell you exactly who was going in and out of the Bosphorus, what they were doing, where they were going, how they were acting. It was a really useful system, but it was completely open source intelligence. So trust me, I'm fairly sure if you go down the number of subscribers to the Bosphorus Naval News and you look through them, you will find a whole host of academics like me, a whole host of naval enthusiasts, a whole host of people who just like looking at pictures of warships. But a lot of the people who were probably following it were people collecting information for government agencies. Because the great thing about open source intelligence, and thank you, Carmen Gasford. A great thing about open source intelligence is that it's very cheap for you to gather as a government. So if you don't have an active espionage program, if you don't have the money for satellites, if you don't have these things, open source intelligence can work really well. And let me show you the old source of open source intelligence, which still does work. It still does work because people still send into it and there's still information in it. I got it. Yeah, here we go. Here's a good example. Actually, no. I'm just going to go to this example. Thank you. Brassies. This is Brassies. Published 1943 edition. Okay? This has all sorts of information in it. All sorts of information, including, at the back, and this is published in wartime, remember? Full list of ships and their armaments. Including for people like Paraguay and China and Manchukuo, who have got a destroyer, the Haivei. The ex-Japanese Kansai, Mazura, 1917, 755 tons, top speed 31.5 knots, when new, we know it's not that now. 3 4.7-inch guns, 3 machine guns, 6 18-inch torpedo tubes, plus their list of gunboats and what they're armed with, and their armed launchers and their patrol boats. You've got Mexico there. You've got Peru, you've got everyone's list of weapons, ships of lesser navies, and, oh, by the way, you also have this, a full list of United States cruisers. The thing is, this is open source intelligence, this is information published, and this is the very basic point which you start building up from. It doesn't matter whether it's 2024, 1924, or 1824, open source intelligence like this, like Brassies, like Bosphorus Naval News, are used by everyone. They are a good foundation because they tell you two things. One, they tell you what they have on paper, and two, they tell you what they'd like you to, and they tell you what the enemy wants you to know they have. There's a great picture in here of HMS Argus under attack in the Mediterranean. Which also tells me that Argus has been being deployed to the Mediterranean. There's also a picture here of HMS Illustrious, with, I reckon, a fairy albacore on the deck. Lots of information in this book. And yeah, you could pick it up for the sum price of... I think it actually has its price written in this one, if I remember correctly. Does it? For me, this book cost me about 40 quid, but I don't think it was at 40 quid. It was printed in the United States of America by the Macmillan Company, and edited by Rear Admiral H.G. Fursfield. Got a picture of HMS Illustrious on the front as well. Oh, and it also, whilst I can't find a price, I can find the armour scheme as officially listed for Italian cruisers in here. It's great. It's a really useful source of information. So you've got open source intelligence. You've got all that information coming through. You've got your own your submarines. They're going to be out trying to gather intelligence on each other. They really are. It's a constant ongoing fun between them, submarines. They're always trying to basically find out what each other are doing. And they do their level best to find out what each other are doing. And study them. And listen to them. And that's the important thing. And you've got maritime patrol aircraft as well, like the P-8 here in RAF colours. The thing is, all these things are out trying to gather information. But the thing about these three is they're trying to gather information covertly, but to an extent it's open. It's part of the armed forces. This one is looking at the information that you are giving away about yourself, that you are discussing. And that's the way YouTube channels are open source intelligence. Things which I talk about, things which Drac talks about, things which, you know, we talked about in bilge pumps, etc. Things which you get talked about in terms of Subbrief and other channels out there. Sutton's channel and all these things. They're all open source intelligence. They're all forms of an open source analysis, where you can go and check your analysis versus someone else, which is why some people involved in it tend to be quite careful. You know, you've got Drac's rule is that he stops in 1950 and doesn't go beyond 1950, unless he's got a very special reason for his channel. I have the rule that when I'm talking about equipment post pretty much 1950, it's going to be, these are the figures as stated in an in Wikipedia, because that means they are the figures which are no one's going to say I'm giving away any information on. No one's going to claim I'm, you know, going to say I've done anything naughty or I've caused anyone trouble, because that's the open source information standard. It's on Wikipedia. That is of course an example of open source information. So yeah, that's all there. But there is more than that, and there's a reason I've got the Spy X family in here. Because anyone who's watched that cartoon, and by the way, it is truly very funny. It is very, very funny. And very cool. And there's a very clever doggy in it. Will know that that mission, the entire mission which the dad is on, is to do with gathering information about what is going on. And about trying to pierce the difference between what is being publicly said and what is actually true. Because the thing is, now on my public display, I might be a nation which tends to undervalue my equipment and talks it down. I might be a nation which overvalues my equipment and talks it up. I've talked about this today in the video when I was recording HMS Tiger for tomorrow. Because there is a lot of information about Queen Mary and Tiger, which is incredibly intriguing. Incredibly intriguing when it comes to the details, when you start looking into it. Because, you know, it's like, apparently, Queen Mary's supposed to do 75,000, got 75,000 shaft horsepower and can do 28 knots. But officially, in the write-ups, she achieved during her workups, during her trials, 83,000 shaft horsepower, and yet barely went over 28 knots. Barely went over 28 knots. Calm down, calm down, calm down. Shh. Calm down, calm down, calm down. Barely went over 28 knots. Shh. Calm down. Good boy, calm down. And that's kind of an intriguing thing, you know. She's 80. You added on 8,000 shaft horsepower, and then there's Tiger herself, which can get up to 108,000 shaft horsepower with forced draft, but they only test her up to a little over 104,000 shaft horsepower, and she did 29 knots. But that's on forced draft, so they list her as having 85,000 shaft horsepower. And only being capable of doing 28 knots. And so they go, so you know, forced draft. So basically, you're telling me that the speeds you're giving for your ships don't include when they're operating under forced draft conditions. So the moment you turn on the capabilities to do forced draft into your engines, which make them more efficient, which make them more powerful, you have been lying, Royal Navy. You are lying. And you're honestly admitting you're lying. Yes, Dan Freeman, that's the thing. They are tactics entirely true for a given value of true. But there are other militaries where they overestimate their capabilities, where they constantly trump up their capabilities. And the thing is, you want to know what you should be building against. What are you building against? Are you building against a Britain? Or are you building against a, let's be honest, Soviet Union? Or Germany? Both of which have an interesting habit of over-egging their things. It's like the German ship speed for a lot of their battle cruisers depend on them having access to Welsh coal. Which, if you consider, it also depends on them having access to turbines built by spare parts and spares coming from Parsons in the UK. Probably makes sense of, wow, you really undercut your entire armed forces structure. Because, of course, in World War I, they lose access to Welsh coal, and they lose access to spare parts of Parsons turbines. Just a small problem with declaring war on Britain. A small one. But a problem nevertheless. And, well, information comes into that. But why specifically does information matter with submarines? Where does it come from? Now, that's going to be an interesting... That's something which is very specific. There are specific things about submarines, but they also apply to modern ships. And when we're talking about information about submarines, we're talking about building a profile. We want to build a profile of what an enemy submarine or enemy warship is like. Ideally, we'd like a solid state of what its sound signature is, a noise signature is going to be like. And honestly, we can get its noise signature primarily from two sources. Two sources of information can give us its noise signature. It's going to be the submarine, or it's going to be the spies. If they can get the data, great. If this vessel, if something like this can be sitting outside and listening as that submarine goes out to sea, then that's a problem. And this is one of the reasons why things like SSBNs, ballistic missile submarines, we do so much of an effort to protect them. Because this is such a problem. There is a reason why there's a frigate assigned to the ballistic missile submarines patrols to patrol the route in and out, where the submarines go out for patrol when they come in for patrol. There's usually also other things we know hanging around there. We know that they're hanging around there because of what is open source information, of where where things have been discussed and where things have been highlighted. But a lot of long-range maritime patrol duties, a lot of these duties in terms of in peacetime for your force, is going to be involved in trying to prevent your enemy from getting such a thing as the noise signature of your ballistic missile submarine to your strategic deterrent, or your attack subs as well if they're going in and out. Your attack subs are more likely and more able to do something about it, because ballistic missile submarines are supposed to exist on hiding, and that's what they are very good at. So if they are discovered, they have a problem. But the reality is, your SSGNs, like the Yasen class here Kazan being illustrated, for the which is the Russian Navy's current SSGNs, they are halfway in between that, because they are, well, what I would call them is a tactical weapon system, but with a strategic reach. To be fair, Derek McManus, we kind of got an idea not that long ago about what British and French submarines do, because they managed to collide with each other while going out to their patrol routes. That kind of revealed quite a lot of the process that was going on. Now, I'm sure it's changed somewhat since then, because only a fool would leave it operating exactly the same. But it does give you a baseline idea of what they were operating at, because of the information that came out then. And basically, the plan seems to be for both is to head to the deepest, darkest part of the North Atlantic and sit there. And that makes a lot of sense, because let's be honest, if you can hide below multiple thermal layers in the water, etc., it does make you virtually impossible to reach, either detect or communicate with, until you pop up to the close enough to the surface to get signal. But we're getting into that later. What does the profile allow us to do? Well, the more accurate a profile we have of a submarine, the more accurate capability we have in terms of going, ooh, that noise is attributed to this submarine. The more likely we are to detect it when we're listening for things. So the point is, if we can build up an accurate image, or even a inferred image from information we know about, because let's say we have a recording of a submarine which is in a similar class, or we have enough information, we've heard that reactor before on another class, or a reactor similar to it, and we've heard propellers like it has before. This is one of the reasons why propellers and impellers, the harmonics of them, are quite such closely guarded secrets in navies, why they often shroud submarine propellers and impellers and those systems to protect them from being viewed, because if you can study them under a picture, you can perhaps work out their harmonics. You know, you can work out what their frequencies, what the noise they're going to make, and all these things add up because you want to be able to pick out a needle in the haystack. Remember, the underwater world is not silent. Okay? You might think, swimming in your swimming pool alone, that the underwater world, being below water, is silent. Here's a trick. Get a nutty mate to come in and swim alongside you as you're swimming underwater. You'll hear something. Very faintly, but you'll hear something. Don't try talking to each other underwater. All you do is get a mouthful of chlorine. But just try swimming alongside each other underwater. You'll hear something. Not quite sure what you're hearing, but you're hearing something. The underwater world, though, in the Atlantic, in the Pacific, in the oceans, that includes volcanoes, that includes landslides, that includes geography and geology. There are huge sources of noise underwater. There are huge pounding sources of noise underwater. And that is the reality you have to deal with. And then you have the whole different thermal layers. The fact that often water temperature changes like it's dropping off a shelf. Currents flowing in and out and all around, the effect of the tides, the actual effect of the rise and fall of the ocean. All these things have an effect on the underwater world and the noise there is down there. That's before you get onto wrecks, you get onto the noise, noise rustling through netting trapped on a wreck can sound like the hum of a reactor turned down really low. It can do. I've had that explained to me by multiple sources, because when I first read it in, actually, this book, Red Storm Rising, I thought, that's insane. Well, it's not. It actually works like that. It works. And yes, they're also biologicals. There's the fact that whales sometimes sound like submarines wandering along, especially if there's enough of them, or shoals of fish, and oh, you can have so much fun with all the other things which can make noise down there. One sonarman once described to me listening to the sounds of a seal being killed underwater. Now that's gonna be quite distracting. That's going to be quite distracting for the sonar operator. And on top of that, as McManus has just put in, yeah, there is no chance on a submarine of knowing where you are. There's a reason why food is so important on a submarine. Food on a submarine is the biggest source of morale because it's the only thing that changes. Everything else is the same. They can't see out the window. They can't do anything else. So food becomes absolutely critically important to morale. If you want a really good cook in your life, someone who can make absolutely fantastic dishes from nothing, here's a trick. Find yourself a submariner who's been one of the cooks on the submarines. Yeah. Trust me. If you can find that, you will never not enjoy food ever again. The skills they have rival Michelin-starred chefs, but they actually cook hearty dishes because they're used to feeding people who have an actual appetite. Rather than the poor people in the Michelin-star chefs who seem to be feeding people who don't actually hate food. Judging by the last time I talked with one who was that. Yes, Kevin Ray. Food on some reason now is like the rum in Dale Sail. Yeah. Although, just because the rum ration has stopped, doesn't mean the Royal Navy ships are dry. Please note that Royal Navy ships are not dry. Someone thought that was the same thing. It's not. Yeah, you don't. The nicest way, KVG, you never feed a submarine crew beans and cabbages. Honestly, no, you don't. You will become the most well-known. You'll be the most noisy submarine in the planet because of the noise of the submarine, or the toilets going constantly. The heads will never stop flushing. It's terrible. So, here we go. Here's the first thing you're going to feed that data into. If you've got that these days, this is what you're going to start feeding data into. The Integrated Undersea Surveillance System. Now, here's a fun thing for you. When this first started, it was considered the undersea world was so complicated and such a problematic world to try and coordinate and understand that they divided it into multiple different sectors. And they had a control station for SOSUS in each sector, and that would coordinate with the local command. Now, since the Cold War ended, and computers have got, of course, far more powerful, they decided they don't need that. And now pretty much the whole of the North Atlantic is coordinated through Norfolk, Virginia, and a joint Anglo-American station over there. The British side has been completely closed down. We did have, I think the last base was actually in Cornwall, in St Morgan, but that's no more. And, you know, they've closed down all the installations elsewhere, and pretty much everything's focused now on Norfolk, Virginia. Now, there was another reason why they had multiple stations. If anyone wants to guess what it was, it's called survivability, because they were ground installations. And so people were worried that if you had only one, or you had only a few, they would easily get wiped out in a war, as they're going to be important targets. Because you see, the IUSS is pretty much the undersea equivalent of airborne early warning and of the massed airborne early warning systems which we sort of strive to develop. You have the sound surveillance system, the SOSUS lines, and the SOSUS data positions. You can actually, if you look at this map, it's always a fun thing to do to look at this map. You can actually see that. You can see where the lines are. And the lines, you can see where they cross the oceans. There's the GI-UK gap, quite easy to see, between Greenland and the UK and Iceland. There's a line further north coming up from Norway. There's some dots around the American and Canadian coast. There's some stuff in the Mid-Atlantic. There's a whole lot of stuff around Japan and across the Pacific. And there's a few other dots in other parts of the world as well. And all that is publicly is open source intelligence. Please note that's all the forms in open source. I highly doubt those dots actually point to where the actual things are. Now the thing is, someone noticed quite quickly that the problem with SOSUS is it was a line, and once you broke through it, you had no depth. At which point, they developed SIRTAS. Now, SIRTAS, the AUN-UQQ2 Surveillance Towed Array Sensor System, which is deployed on things like USNS Impeccable and the Victorious class vessels. They are these massive swath ships which deploy these huge towed arrays, colossal towed arrays, and basically will patrol outside of major shipping lanes, and they will gather data for the entire North Atlantic. They are again quite high up the target priority list of anyone who's sensible in trying to take out protection in the Atlantic. But the thing is, they're going to be moving, and whilst they will be transmitting data almost constantly, it's probably going to be via satellite, so it's going to be hopefully slightly harder to pinpoint. But the reality is, these vessels are designed as massive data collectors. They are humongous data collectors. Again, they all belong to the US. One of the things you're going to notice about a lot of discussions here is a lot of this stuff does depend on US-owned systems, because, how do I put this politely? Okay, so the thing is, whilst governments recognise the need to continue with anti-submarine warfare capabilities and have continued to recognise the need, the sexy part of war for the last 2 years was counterinsurgency. And so a lot of nations were focusing their budget in on that. And they were ignoring other things. Now, when the US focuses in its budget, it doesn't really matter because they have a massive budget anyway, so the other stuff is still going to survive and get funding. Maybe not at the same level, but it's still going to get some funding. And when it comes down to it, at the end of it, when you realise, hang on, oh, history hasn't ended, it's carrying on the same, and oh, frigate, I focused in all on this, and now I'm in trouble because I'm not prepared for X, Y, or Z. Well, that's your problem. That's when you start to go, ouch. And you decide that, frankly, there are better things you need to start investing quickly. And then you tend to go around and go, well, I haven't been doing any research and development, so I can either go for a lot of costly money investment and do this myself, or I can buy off the Americans, or I can buy into the American system. I would say, and I would hope, one of the things I really hope is going to happen under the new SDSR, if there is any money spent on improved ASW warfare in the UK, in UK budgets, etc., and I would hope this would come on NATO as well, is that there is a new centre established in the UK for listening to all, gathering and collecting all this data. Because I honestly think you cannot afford to have so few land stations as we currently have for this role. Basically, you have fleets which have theoretically the technology required for wartime, and this comes back to what I was talking about with Glynn and designing a science fiction fleet the other day. They have on paper the capabilities and weapon systems you need for a war. Because they haven't fought a war for such a long time, they actually aren't really prepared for it on the infrastructure and the sort of psychological level. Because no one has attacked these places. That's the point. No one has attacked these places. I'm just send a message that I need to do an advert on YouTube. So let me just do the advert. I've pressed a button. About 20 minutes late. I'm supposed to do it on the hour. No one reminded me. You never remind me. And YouTube gets very annoyed when I don't do it. They really do. Twitch just takes me out, takes out a chance and just does it. They just get a warning occasionally going, we're doing an advert, and I go, okay, fine. So, the whole point is, this stuff is about wide data gathering and about bringing in a huge amount of data. And it is a truly colossal amount of data. They are literally listening to everything. Okay? Let me put out what that is. That means they are not listening in for a specific submarine. They are not listening for a specific coastal ocean. They are hearing the whole ocean. They are literally gathering in everything. That gives you a problem. That gives you too much data, almost. These systems are very much approaching the point of giving you almost too much data to be useful. You then need to pass through that data as quickly and succinctly as you can. You have to be as efficient in your detailing data as possible. And the more accurate an image or noise signature you have of an enemy submarine, the more easily you can spot that submarine in that noise. That's your life. That's what you have to deal with. It's sorting through a huge amount of information. Well, Dan, you've asked them in the question of, might be a role for AI, maybe a reason research when we went into that. Well, guess what? Not so much AI, but the algorithms and the search and research algorithms that underpin a lot of AI, a lot of the deep learning and deep language models, etc., which actually most AI these days currently is, actually do come from a lot of the research funded by DARPA into trying to search through this information. And that's a perfectly sensible source. So this is where the maritime patrol aircraft start to kick in. Because if you have all this data coming in, if you have all this information coming in, you need to start tracking down on the results, don't you? Because you're going to get hundreds of possible contacts. And you're probably going to, even from your passed out list, from your well worked through list, you're going to have all these contacts. So you're going to start aiming in maritime patrol aircraft. They're the easiest things you can direct and you can send to areas. So rather than in the past where they were a constant, they were not, they were a constant, they were patrolling to make submarines dive down and force them underwater. They're now patrolling with the purpose of being diverted to go and hunt submarines, to go and verify contacts, to go and try and find out if a sub is really there, if a sub is really doing something. Because it's far safer to send one of these than it is to send ships or anything else to go and investigate, because if those ships are probably more needed elsewhere, it's far quicker for them to deploy. And it's also safer because it's less likely to cost you one of these than potentially a ship, if a ship blunders on it unawares. A ship has the risk of taking a torpedo or a missile hit. Whilst, yes, some of the Soviet-era boats, and I think some of the modern Russian ones, still do carry surface-to-air missiles, those systems are, how do I put this politely? They launch them when they know they're in trouble to try and give them a last-ditch way to break away. That's their policy. They're not going to fire them under any circumstances. And pretty much they're really, some of them are not able to fire them underwater. The ones which are able to fire them underwater, they're not able to fire them from deep. So the maritime patrol aircraft are what are going to be sent. And whilst, yes, we will be talking that through in a second, Dan Freeman, the fact is, things like the Kawasaki P1, which is the Japanese maritime patrol aircraft, and currently what apparently the Italians are considering getting, the P1 rather than the P8. And which is actually not a bad idea. Not a bad idea. There is a reason for that. You know, if you consider that where the Italians are mostly focused in terms of the Mediterranean, the P1 does make sense. And they can possibly buy a few more P1s than they can P8s. Whereas, if you're looking at patrolling over the North Atlantic and integrating into forces patrolling the North Atlantic, the P8 is really the only option. I know there are people who made a big fuss when the Royal Air Force went for the P8 and went, "Why? They should have had more of a competition, there should be more entries." But the answer was quite simple. Who else is going to be running over the North Atlantic? Oh, it's going to be the US, and it's going to be Norway, and it's going to be probably the Germans and the Danish, and they're all pretty much, if they're going to get anything, are going to get P8s. So yeah, let's integrate and have a common force. Kevin, save your question for the end and I'll answer that and I'll explain why CVEs weren't in that particular discussion and then put in that point. There are points that could have been discussed, but yeah, that wasn't the policy then. That wasn't what they were doing at that point. So the mission for aircraft has changed. They've changed from a primary deterrent role to a hunter-killer role. Now, if you talk to many submariners these days, they will tell you the aircraft never stand a chance. Then I will ask them I will tend to turn around to those same submariners and go, so what happens when an aircraft drops sonobuoys? Well, you know, we then have to avoid the area. And that's the thing, because P8 or P1 or all these aircraft could be carrying hundreds of sonobuoys if they want to. Can they be carrying, and these sonobuoys, they get loaded into the aircraft, but they can be dropped in various patterns over the years, and they are what provide them with a detection. Them and sometimes a magnetic anomaly detector, depending on the aircraft, etc. This is the reality of what they're using. This is the reality of what they're doing. They're doing this to provide information. Believe it or not, sonobuoys are also used by by helicopters, and by the way, so are pretty much the same airdrop torpedoes quite often. Now, these systems, they might engage the submarine. They might even, especially the torpedoes, might actually cause the submarine to have trouble. But the thing is more about the sonobuoys is they tend to create problems, because even if an aircraft doesn't localize enough a solution to be able to feel confident about dropping a torpedo, that area is now going to be marked as red and hostile. There's an enemy submarine likely in there. So you either move out of that area, in which case you risk making noise which is going to confirm you and allow something else to be sent in, which might kill you more likely, or you stay in that area and there's no one coming near there. They're just going to treat it as a minefield. So this is all about information gathering, and sometimes the aircraft which are sent might not be maritime patrol aircraft as long-range maritime patrol aircraft. If you're near enough to a carrier battle group, near enough to a convoy escort, it could be a helicopter which is sent when a signal's been isolated. It could be, a pair of helicopters. There are times when you've had MPAs come in and then helicopters in exercises turn up as well. And they try and coordinate between all the assets. Add in a frigate with a towed sonar array. The point is, it's rather like when you're trying to make threats to convoy escorts, as the Germans did in World War II and World War I. There's an advantage if you can make a multi-vector threat. If you can be providing threats from surface systems, subsurface systems, aircraft. You've given me a three-dimensional threat profile. I've got threats from all these different options. If you're just trying to hunt me down with aircraft, then all I have to do is make sure I stay deep enough and try and hide below the thermal layer and try and run as quickly out of that area as possible. You start adding in more things. You add in a helicopter. Well, a helicopter has a dipping sonar. That's a completely different profile to try and avoid other than the sonobuoys. Sonobuoys getting dropped, oh, that's a problem. But adding a dipping sonar on there, I've got real worries. I've got real worries and real problems. And then add in potentially torpedoes in the water if they think they've got an accurate sniff of me. James Stanley, I would guess that ASW is like trying to pick out a new voice in a crowded pub on match day. Pretty much. You have summed it up very accurately. You walk into a pub on match day, or a sports bar if you're American, and you've got all these people being noisy, chatting away, talking non-stop, especially when you're not got any action going on and everyone's just talking and everyone's just vibing. It's trying to pick out a voice, or it's trying to listen to the person across the table from you at a noisy nightclub. It's not gonna work. I'm not sure, Stafford. I've just seen your messages and think, might be a little bit naughty. A little bit naughty. But yeah. So, thing is, what happens? Well, as said, potentially, when the MPA's been over there, if they believe a contact is true, there is a threat there, and then they believe that threat is, they can't engage it themselves, for whatever reason, they can't get a solution, then the information is sent back up to the chain. And either another maritime patrol aircraft might come out to the area, might be listening in, or the nearest convoy or battle group, their escorts will get alerted, and maybe their helicopters will go in that direction. Or if they think it's a really big threat, if they think it's something like a Yasen SSGN with that capability, they might actually detach a frigate off from the convoy or the battle group to go hunting, so it can get close to its towed sonar array and provide clarification. But also, there is the very simple possibility that some might judge, well, that submarine is so far out of the line of movement of any of us actually going through, why would we bother? Hi, Jonathan Moon. Why would we bother about that? Why will we even consider doing this? What is the benefit to us sending the assets over there? If they want to sit over there, lead them over there. And we're only engage them if they move. At which point, the submarine gets, of course, a chance to try and slink out and slink away. Now, Mark Harkness, whilst you're right that the thing that worries you about raiding shipping these days is that you don't have to kill as many hulls to get the same level of impact as previous conflicts. Very true. There's also the problem you don't have as many assets to go hunting with. And I would say there is enough variety of options available that you can make things more and more problematic. One of the interesting things, and one of the things I'm fairly certain we're going to be seeing quite soon, is aircraft, as in uncrewed aircraft, supplementing anti-submarine warfare helicopters by carrying more dipping sonars, because it's well known that if you can multiply your number of dipping sonars providing information for your data, for your search, you can make things vastly more problematic for your opponent. And whilst we have tried to focus in on one helicopter, to prosecute one target, yeah, you can do it. You can avoid that. And what Pete Dawson, yes, submarines on. If you draw a circle around a submarine, going, it has a 60-mile attack range of harpoon. It has a 60-mile range. Okay, here's the small problem with that. That requires the submarine can detect the targets itself within that space enough to make an accurate resolution for their missiles. B, then they have to launch their missiles, which of course does reveal their positions, and they have to be sure the target's worth hitting with their missiles. And are they going to hit it if it's a convoy? Because if you're launching missiles at 60 miles range in terms of harpoons, and you're launching them from a submarine, you're going to make enough noise in water, everyone's going to know you've launched missiles. And everyone's going to know where it's come from. So there's going to be things heading your way. But B, all the air defense are alerted. And how many harpoons have you got? So the odds are you're going to save your weapon systems for when you can do the most impact. Which means I can possibly ignore you and just try and route about 60 miles away from you to keep your frame, until you either move to being attacking range to attack something, or until which gives me a clue that there's something else big coming, because you're likely to move to attack combined with the same point as someone's launching an air attack. So I expect air launch missiles to be launched from one angle, and submarine launch missiles to come from another angle, and maybe surface launch missiles to come from a third angle. And that's you trying to overload my system. But you just rattling off a couple of harpoons from 60 miles away from a submarine, that doesn't really help you or anyone. And it doesn't help. It's the same with the KVG, 500 miles in the case of the P800 Onyx. Yes, true. But how good is your target identification at 500 miles? Or are you having to use outside information to give your target identification? Because that's the other trouble for submarines. That's the problem for submarines. If you're trying to use really long-range weapons with a submarine, you either need to know where the target is beforehand, it needs to be a geographically fixed location, so you can program the weapons beforehand, or you need to get the information to them on the fly. And that's a whole different problem. That is a whole different problem and a whole different ballgame. Which we get into as we go further, because you have SSN coordination. Now this is when we touch upon stuff which is probably the most touchy and most focused of the areas. We have very low frequency VLF communication. That can go into tens of meters of deep water. So possibly a little over 100, but mostly it's well below, well under 100 meters depth. And VLF systems officially, the nations which have VLF transmitters are Australia, France, Germany, India, Norway, Pakistan, Russia, UK, and United States. Officially. Please note, I'm saying this is the official list. I don't care if you've heard your nation also might have the system. The official list, as is publicly acknowledged, is this. And then beyond that, we have extremely low frequency, which is hundreds of meters. China, India, Russia, and the United States. And again, Kevin, please save the questions for the end, because that's quite a big question to answer. And if I go off and answer that in the middle of talking about the communications, then everyone will lose the track of the questions. So save your merchant aircraft carriers and your auxiliary carriers questions and that question for the end, for when I get to the end. We're at 13 out of 18 slides, so it shouldn't be too long. Now, the thing is about all this information is it's all one way. The subs don't have the same communication system. They can't communicate back using this because it requires massive aerials. They can receive it, but they can't transmit back. And I would say, in my opinion, the data is limited. There are people who argue that due to the logarithm and various other things that extremely low frequency can send quite a large chunk of data. I am not quite sure about that. I'm not sure I personally think that sort of works out, because the thing is, getting this information through to them, through to the boats, is going to be quite limited and focused. So think of it more as being able to send a telegram rather than an email. That's more what we're talking about. It's more of a telegram than an email. Again, this coordination is very limited. You send it out and you can maybe focus it on one boat or the other boat, but honestly, they still can't be too deep. And you basically they tend to report back. Submarines tend to send messages back by launching a communications buoy, right? So they'll carry a certain number of these aboard, and the buoy will get launched up to the surface. It might actually dangle just below the surface, and it'll broadcast the message. And once it's finished broadcasting as a message to a satellite, it sinks itself and disappears. That's usually put on a time delay as well, so it floats up and then time. So it's going to be difficult to detect for any enemy submarines or enemy ships in the area or aircraft to detect. But B, it's going to be going off a lot later than the submarine has got past. And this has changed in many ways coordinating submarines, because submarines are no longer on the surface. This is what people forget about the wolf packs. The reason why the Royal Navy was quite so easily able to track in on wolf packs and work out where they frigating were was the amount of radio communications that had to go on between the boats for them to actually meet up in the middle of the ocean. Yes, there's always we were flashing lights to communicate, which you still did in World War II and you can still do today. Great. That's a nice... But when you're communicating between U-boats over a large distance to get a wolf pack together, there's going to be lots of communications. And thank for goodness they were on the surface, because they could communicate. If they'd all been below the surface, it wouldn't work. It's one of the reasons why when people say things like, oh, the Type 21 U-boats... if they'd been, carrying out wolf packs, then the Royal Navy would be in real trouble. No, they wouldn't have been, because the moment you have the Type 21 trying to carry out a wolf pack operation, it's going to be on the surface transmitting, in which case a lot of its advantages goes away. It's either going to be a surface that's very close to the surface, with radar aerial and radio aerial and everything sticking up above the water. Which means all that air search system, all those systems can detect where it is and what it's doing and what it's getting up to. Okay, what was that noise about? Oh, you problem with your paw. Okay. So yeah. The thing is, the Type 21, a great boat for its period when it's being designed in World War II. But it's not going to revolutionise the Wolfpack, because the fundamental of the Wolfpack is coordination, and to do that coordination, you need to make a lot of signals, which is the fundamental thing which undermines the Wolfpack. It's very effective as long as the Royal Navy doesn't have enough escorts in service. Or, well, doesn't have enough escorts where they need it. And once the Royal Navy has enough escorts to both have the escorts groups on each convoy to deal with lone submarines which send them, and the surge hunter killer groups which come in to reinforce convoys when they hear a U-boat force, a Wolfpack's heading their way, which they'd learned through the radio transmissions. That changes the whole of World War II's metrics on submarine survival. But as I recall, the UK found quite a lot of them without needing to break Enigma. Yeah. The people think the whole of World War II is about breaking Enigma. No, that's lovely. That gives you a lot of the Royal Navy's victories at sea were not to do with breaking Enigma. They were literally signals traffic analysis. And here's a fun little fact for you. Whilst all the Enigma stuff has been to an extent declassified and is now public knowledge, guess what isn't? All the systems used to analyze to carry out signals traffic analysis. All that stuff is still sealed, not coming out. Good luck, Stafford. Have fun with billiards. Hello, November the 30th. You're good. And the thing is, with these communication systems, by the way, you pretty much read through and you go, which nations are serious about operating their submarines? Now, one of the interesting points was when you're looking at the extremely low frequency system, the ELF, and you're looking at it, you've got China, India, Russia, and the United States. And many people say that the Indian system has come from adapting a VLF station. That's the official. So you start to look over which nations on this list, by the way, operate ballistic missile submarines. France, China, Russia, USA, UK, all operate those. And if we consider the Indian Navy, they also operate two ballistic missile submarines, the Ariant and the Arigat, the Ariat class, which they're fairly new, if I remember correctly. Yeah. They're to be succeeded by the S5s, which haven't been built yet, but they were put in a commission in 2016. They've got 3 actually in service, and they have completed the 4th, but it's not ended service yet. Hello, Poodle. To what do I owe this currently fussing attention? Hello. Now, that's why you want to have these systems. They're not really about... Hello, Tudor! Is there a reason you're wolfing at my door?
He's not.
Okay. You have these systems to communicate with the submarines, but let's be honest, you have the ELF is pretty much about communicating with your ballistic missile subs rather than your attack subs. And to an extent, it's also about being able to send them warnings. We've detected an SSN in your area. Heads up. There are enemy ships happening, moving out, all the things you might need to send them. You're not expecting necessarily a response from them, because a response might reveal their position, but you need to contact them with vital information. November 30th. Very cool question. I'm going to finish going through the slides, and I'm going to say that's someone on Kevin Ray on YouTube asked a similar question as well earlier about the oceans becoming transparent, and I want to get into that at the end, so I'll discuss that once I got through the slides. So, because I'm going to be careful and get through the slides, okay? But it's only another 5 slides to go, so we're really not got far to go. Now, with this as being the communication, and the communication facilities not being great, well, coordination is going to be difficult. Now, coordination of ASW warfare and all this force, technically, if you're considering NATO, I'm using an example, but for most other nations, it's the same. And again, all this comes from open source. All this information is open source. Literally, I have print screened the Wikipedia entry of NATO strategic command posts and their centres. Maritime Command is northward, by the way, which this picture is available of it, which kind of shows a huge amount of... That's not sand, that's concrete. Please note, that large amount of thing you're seeing there is concrete. A huge amount of concrete. That northward headquarters is sitting on top. And they are bringing together all this information. All this information is starting to be synthesized into these. And this is where they're making the allocation of assets and they're sending out the systems. And they're trying to make the judgment calls. And they have to try to cover a huge portion of the world's surface. Because this is to cover the whole Atlantic. And they're taking the burden up, which used to be about a dozen centers, have now been divided into two or three. They're done in the nicest way. I could have also done the Russian and the Chinese centers from Wikipedia as well. I've gone with the British. I've gone with this one because, to be honest, I'm more familiar with the terms when it comes to the NATO system. Now, the thing is, all these commands are trying to synthesize all this information together to try and get a picture of what's going on. And I would say, whilst there have been some pretty big exercises conducted recently, there is nothing on the scale of an actual war. Because for you to conduct anything on the scale of an actual war, you'd have to have multiple convoys running. And actually be running them. You'd have to get permission to basically take merchant ships out of their normal trading and run convoys. Which, by the way, the Royal Navy did in the 1930s. This is why when I talk about the Royal Navy exercises in the 1930s, I talk about them being on a scale which even surpasses some of the American exercises. Because say they have a habit of bringing the whole Atlantic fleet and Mediterranean fleet together and going to war against each other. But B, they're quite happy to take up from trade half a dozen merchant ships and form them into a convoy to try and simulate a convoy. They are quite happy to take up more if they get the chance and use Royal Fleet auxiliaries as well to simulate a convoy and defend a convoy and have multiple convoys running. So yeah, all these commands are trying to do something. They're all trying to get this information, sort it, and try and work out what to do, and coordinate the response to the patrol aircraft, and coordinate the actions of the ships. I'm cynical of everyone's because, let's be honest, they couldn't, you know. Sometimes you look at the pictures and you go, That's what you have on Wikipedia. But the reality is, the other problem for a lot of the people making their judgments about these situations is that those command posts are, whilst they're able to affect things on a strategic level, at its base point, a lot of things are going to end up boiling down to decisions taken in places which, well, used to look like that and sort of still look like this to an extent. They've changed a lot. They have improved. But the reality is the decisions are going to be taken in those places. Why? Because they have to be. Because at the end, they're the ones making the judgment call of, do we fire or don't we? Are we going to be attacking a whale or are we attacking a submarine? And if we don't fire and they fire first, we're possibly dead. So do we take the? Do we kill the? Take the? Do we just kill? Not worry about killing a whale and just fire? Yes, the odds are the decisions to engage will be taken by people who are maybe in their 20s, possibly in their 30s. There might be a few in their 40s, captains, and those sort of ranks. But yeah, on frigates and on frigates and destroyers, etc. involved. But that's the reality of war. It always has been. There's always been this idea that, the people making decisions should be experienced, mature individuals. No, the decisions are often made by very junior, very inexperienced officers who are the ones there at the time. And it's their job to make decision. So you have to do your best to prepare them. You have to have all sorts of training, all sorts of exercises. You have to give them history lessons. It's the weirdest thing. Why do armed forces tend to be so well prepared to refight the last war? Because it's the most recent history they can study from and draw from. So they study it a lot, and so it becomes wedded into their thinking. It's not because forces are stuck in the past, it's because that's the best source of information they have to draw from. They don't have anything better. Yeah. War studies at King's College London, yeah, that's a great example. The Masters program there is the reason why you have the students you do on the Masters course there. And it's not because it's a really fashionable university to go to. Because let's be honest, as much as I love KCL, and I do, it was my brilliant thing doing a PhD there. It was an absolute joy. And teaching the students there was great. It was the course it offered and how unique and how the fact it's the best and the oldest course of that type in the world that attracted the students. And yes, if you are hitting a whale, and you have just announced your presence, yes. But the problem with that one, Derp Squad, is that's a judgment call. And hopefully there's going to be enough people engaging enough whales that, frankly, your presence is not going to be a problem. Again, for escorts, this becomes an almost de rigueur. It's, part and parcel of the consequences. You're going to have to broadcast. There's a good thing in this Red Storm Rising, which is kind of interesting, where the Soviets basically, with one of their fleets when they're moving, just go all active. Now, the thing is, if you're using active sonar rather than passive sonar, you are broadcasting your position to people 3 times the distance away from you that you can detect. But you do create an area of detection which is wide enough and large enough that people aren't possibly not going to get close enough to actually attack you by a submarine. They might not get into torpedo range because they're going to get detected by your active gear. So you've made the judgment call that's better. Well, it's better. It doesn't matter if those people who are 3 times the distance no we're here away from us. Yes, they might be able to lob a missile in the direction, but that doesn't matter. We can deal with that far easier than we can deal with a submarine managing to get right into the middle of our task force and torpedo us. We can deal with a missile attack far easier than we can deal with a submarine torpedo attack. So we'll go all active. And that would present a real problem. Because sometimes the problem you have in developing your anti-submarine warfare capabilities and your submarines is you presume your opponent is going to act like you do. And there are lots of factors, and again, you just raised a very good point. If there's nothing else killing the whale, at least now since they're here be escorts, so Mr. Sub might look for an easier target. And yes, they might do. The subs might well look for an easier target. It's often sensible to. Let's reach this to a summary. Basically, integrated anti-submarine warfare. It's on a massive scale. It's oceanic these days. It has to be. Because it used to be anti-submarine warfare was just about protecting convoys, just about protecting your warships. Now, with the strike assets available to submarines, whether they be tactical missiles or ballistic missiles, etc., and all the other options, the reality is you are about defending your own coastline, defending your own nation. To an extent, it's forced all nations to start looking at the sea potentially like bastions, like the Soviets did during Cold War, where they were trying to develop bastions at sea, which would be areas where enemy forces would fear to tread. And that's always an idea to try and pursue. It's a difficult one to introduce without a lot of spending, and it's a difficult one to enforce without a lot of spending. But it's an idea. The reality is, and I would say this is the important thing, that anti-submarine warfare is going to stay this way as long as the world is like it is. Now, there have already been... So I'm going to answer the questions in reverse, because there have been 2 questions which have basically been about piercing the world's oceans. Are we really going to peel them back? Well, here's the major point of that. The argument goes, if we gather enough data, we can make an accurate enough model of the world's oceans and of the movement of the world's oceans that when something isn't going as it's supposed to, we'll be able to detect it using weather satellites, using the various satellites which monitor the world's currents, and go, oh, there's a submarine there. Now, here is the point I will tend to make. Okay, you might be right, there might be a submarine there. But I think it's just going to be a system which eventually essentially replaces the role of SOTUS and SOSUS. Or probably complements them, because if you're sensible, you want to keep those systems going as well. And it's going to be a system of going, oh, look at that, and you tuck in and you use that to find things to send patrol aircraft to go and look at. I don't think it's going to necessarily peel back the world's oceans in a time frame which is going to make us go, oh, submarines, we shouldn't be investing in those. It's not going to be that quick and that easy or that capable that soon, I would say. Due to the fact that for it to work, it requires you to have real-time processing of the world's oceans. And you can't afford to have an imperfect model. You can't afford to have just be looking at a section of the world's oceans. You have to be looking at the entire world's oceans to make it work. Because of the problems. And that creates a huge amount of data delay and a huge amount of data for you to process. So I think the reality comes down to it is going to add to the picture in terms of the information being gathered. It's going to make it certainly more of a very capable system. It's going to hopefully help you refine your target list more, because you're going to look at your information from those satellites, you're going to look at your SOSUS information, you're going to look at the SOSUS information, and you're going to compile it all together, and you're going to go, well, hang on, we have the same things turning up on all three. Okay, that's high priority, MPA, go to that one. This one's turned up on 2 out of 3. Okay, well, that's going to be lower priority, but its MPA is going to be set on this one. This thing just turns up on one of them. Okay, that's going to be something we're going to watch on here. And if we start seeing other data coming through, then we'll change our mind on it. That's the sort of policy you're going to adopt. And in many ways, that will make things both easier and more complicated. Because sometimes there's going to be something, there's going to be a submarine which is only going to be detected by one of those systems. And you're then, might launch an attack or might hit something, and then people are going to go, you detected it and you did nothing! And your answer's going to be, well, we were off processing these potential targets. But they turned out to be nothing. Why didn't you go after that one? Because it only showed up on one system. And that's the problem. And Calvin goes back, you are just as right when you say this, or that response to IO 2, that, if there be escorts, maybe it's worth a backfire strike. Maybe it's not. Because are they running escorts of all the convoys? If they are, then that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be worth it or not. Again, you're going to get that information out of probably open source intelligence. If the sub is willing to transmit the whale engagement. Yes, that's the other problem. Is the sub prepared to reveal its position, potentially, to tell you that that an escort has been at a certain range engaging whales? And that also, the thing is, I've talked today about SOSUS, I've talked today about all the other systems. Well, guess what? The Chinese, the Russians, they all try and develop their own versions of these same systems. Now, they've not actually got to deploy them. I think the Chinese are really focused on something around SOSUS, but they haven't got to it at all at the moment. Give them time. The Russians, well, at the moment they're focusing their defense spending. That isn't still being siphoned off by corruption, which is just an endemic problem they seem to have. I can't say we're much better, but mostly the problems that are created in terms of the errors of accountancy, especially for the US, seem to me more a problem of old accounting systems and old systems which are basically provided to be secure because of obsolescence. And security for obsolescence is a great idea for a force which is a massive organization, but it can introduce other issues. And I think that's probably where the accountancy problems comes from. But leave that to one side. Now, did anything get revealed on the whole OceanGate thing? Not as much as some people thought there'd be. Honestly. One of the interesting things is whenever there are issues in terms of, especially newspaper scoops, I sometimes wish the newspapers would go and check what's already openly available and listed on Wikipedia, or in the documents listed on Wikipedia, because the amount of times they go, leak of this information, and you go, I'm sure that was published in a document not long ago. Then you go, then if you're like me, the first place to go and check is the bottom of the Wikipedia page on the subject, and go and check the sources list, and then go, oh yeah, there you go, link to that, there it is. That was published 18 months ago, and now it's been leaked to the press. Oh, happy days. And they haven't bothered to go read this, because this would actually give them more fuller information. Oh. It's one of those sad things. Sad things. Now, Kenray, you asked another question, which was a really cool one, which is about why did auxiliary carriers not get ordered with the Flower class? And in answer to your question, that was planned. But what happens is the Royal Navy is developing a fast tanker program, and my strong suspicion, based on how rapidly they were turned into amphibious ships for transporting landing craft, utility, and those sort of things, is that those ships were designed to be worked up and sorted into certain things. And considering how quickly the British have plans for adding on these facilities to merchant vessels, and they have a profile of merchant ships they want for even Mac carriers worked up very quickly, I would say there's quite a lot of pre-war studying. And they even have a definition to work from, because remember, they have the cruiser carrier doctrine. The Royal Navy has the cruiser carrier, which is basically a war. It's kind of like the sloop versus the frigate and the corvette. If the cruiser carriers had actually been built, they are the full naval build version of an escort carrier. They're able to carry about the same amount of aircraft, but they are the fully worked up. And yeah, it's one of those things of they want these vessels, they want these assets, but they're limited to what they can get through. And there's also the problem that realistically, the first things they're ordering and they're trying to get through and get built are the fleet carriers, because they can do escort role, they can do some escort role, but they can also do the fleet operations, etc. And there is a lot which is paused by Churchill's decision. And one of the problems it causes people to stop working on the accelerators or systems they need for carriers. You know, when you stop carrier construction, you create a whole series of problems down the whole supply chain, because you're not just stopping the carriers being built in the yards, you're stopping the construction of accelerators for the carriers, you're stopping the arrestor cables, you're stopping all those things down the supply chain. So this is what Churchill does with his decision. When he stops them, he stops the whole supply chain, and then they have to restart it. And it takes a while to get it restarted, because even though it's only down for roughly 6 months, it might as well be 6 years in wartime, when you've got people being drawn off to more important active production lines and all sorts of issues. And then you have to rebuild and reconstitute. With some people you can grab back from those production lines, which creates disruption in those lines, and people that come in that you don't have to train up. And it is just a sodding nightmare. So yeah, it's one of those unintended consequences of a decision which sounds good if you're reacting with a World War I anti-submarine warfare experience, where the Royal Navy took ages to actually get round to organising escorts and ordering them on enough, because there was a whole argument about convoys. And the main threat from submarines at first was mines, so they were ordering minesweepers more than they were ordering escorts. But the fact is, the Royal Navy of World War II, or rather than the Royal Navy of 1938, when they make their plans and they start making their orders through so that ships are being laid down in 1939, is not the Royal Navy of 1914, 1915, 1916. And that's the problem. So yeah, it's the law of unintended consequences. And 85.3, a small country's intelligence service are just guys sitting on Wikipedia constantly hitting refresh. Probably in terms of their analysis of certain things, but also you've got open source. Another good source of open source is, of course, ambassadors and embassies, and having them do wandering around and have communications and chat with people and go on visits and wander where they can. That will give you open source information, and that will sometimes give you slightly more than open source information, because it might allow you to send one of your experts to go and actually have a look at something in person. And then, you know, that's the things you can sort out. There's a reason why so many of the skilled Japanese naval officers get posted to Britain and America as embassy officials in the 1920s and 30s. It's not because that's a really in-demand posting that, you know, they require to be the best of the best. It's because if you send them to those places, they can go and have a look around the places using their diplomatic passports and these things, and go and look at and see what the navies are prepared to allow them to see, and they can pass their own judgments and ideas over what those navies have. And by the way, the Royal Navy and the US Navy do the exact same thing to Japan. You know, that they have those people. There's a reason why quite often the Royal Navy officer who's attached as the embassy officer in Germany has an engineering background of some kind, because they're constantly keeping an eye on their shipyards and on their maritime infrastructure to watch them for rebuilding it too fast or beyond what the Treaty of Versailles allows. Yeah. But there's also the problem, Calvin Gasberg, you're listing up costs of Javelin anti-tank guided missile versus the Russian Cornet. And the problem is delivery. You see, if you consider you are allowed to purchase javelins by the US government from a US factory, you will get javelins, and they will arrive promptly when you order them. If you try and order them from Russia, well, there's a problem of actually getting delivery. And the countries actually complain at this point. Yes, they're cheaper, but you might actually not get them delivered, in which case you end up with nothing. Ay, caramba. So it's the joy of this scenario, and of a lot of the discussions when it comes to anti-submarine warfare, just how much you need to engage, and just how much needs to be brought to bear to cover modern anti-submarine warfare. But realistically, again, we're talking about the similar systems. We're not talking about things that are new or novel. One of the debates you often get into in terms of technological development is whether something is an evolutionary adaptation or a revolutionary adaptation, or novel. And when we're talking about anti-submarine warfare, the aircraft have evolved. But the aircraft that were doing maritime patrol during World War II were often very similar to the aircraft that were still doing maritime patrol into the 60s. Because what you've always needed for maritime patrol aircraft is long range and endurance. That's it. Reliability, long range, and endurance. One of the interesting things we're starting to get back to is some people are actually looking at the Japanese, who have usually about two types of ASW maritime patrol aircraft. One of them is usually a flying boat. The Japanese have maintained this in small numbers and small rate production. There are now people looking at the flying boat idea and going, hang on, maybe this is useful to get back into. Because of logistical resupply, but also because, specifically, the long-range flying, the flying boat option does offer you some potential advantages. As said, helicopters can deploy towed array sonar. Maritime patrol aircraft currently can't. But if the seas are okay for a aircraft to land on and take off from, it could possibly taxi along towing a towed array sonar. And when you consider its engines are out of the water, there is an option going on there. Now, myself, I am highly doubtful of that being actually implemented because, let's be honest, it's cheaper to just drop a lot more sonobuoys. It is a lot cheaper to drop a lot more sonobuoys. And maybe to improve sonobuoys a bit. But, yeah, these ideas are being considered. Anyway, as we've now got to the summary point, as with all the videos, this is now question time, and yeah, we've got 45 minutes roughly for questions, because I thought there could be quite a few questions in this scenario. I thought there could be quite a few for anti-submarine warfare, and so, yeah. Make sure done. Would the new US anti-sub platform be based on a 787? If I remember correctly, the P-8 Poseidon has not long entered into this world, and that's based on a 737 or 767? Yeah, 737-800. So I doubt the P-8 Poseidon is going anywhere anytime soon. It's been manufactured since 2009, and if we consider how long the P3 was in service for prior to it, I doubt the P8 is going to be in the service for any less time. The P3 Orion from Lockheed was in service and still in service now. Was manufactured from 1961 to 1990, so under production for 29 years. Ended service in August 1962, and it's still in service to this day. And there are roughly 757, including 107 produced by Kawasaki in Japan, in service. The P8, there are already 181 of those in service as of October this year, and yeah, they're working with the USN, the Indian Navy, the Royal Australian Air Force, and the Royal Air Force. Thank you, Kevin Ray. Glad you enjoyed it. Rafa, are there flying boats with large doors like the Hercules or the Galaxy? Don't think so. I've just had a beep from YouTube. They want another advert, so I'll just do that. Hopefully the advert's over. Attempting to destroy flying boats in runway is interesting. It is. It is highly interesting. And there are flying boats are interesting in terms of they don't yet are like a Hercules or a Galaxy, but you could make one. I've seen designs with them as options. Thomas Go, what's the meaning of life? I think everyone has their own meaning of life they find for themselves. Mine is family and naval history and passing on information, learning stuff and passing it on. That's the things I love, and that's what I find as that's my thing I love to do. So that's my meaning of life. I think everyone finds their own. I think trying to search for a universal meaning of life for everyone, that's not going to work. Glad you enjoyed it. Clarke, floatplane version of the to be reintroduced fairy swordfish. Oh, don't keep scaring me with that idea. So whatever replaces 737 as a basis, assuming the P9s are ever out of service. Yeah, whatever replaces the 737 will probably replace the P8s. Don't worry. I think the B-52 will probably outlive the B-8. The B-52 outlives everything, because basically the P-52 is very good at what it does, which is being a bomb truck, and they just keep rebuilding it. Matthew Renz, why was Coastal Command not part of the Fleet Air Arm? Because the Royal Air Force insisted it be part of them. Air Ministry politics and 1918 decisions, and some very stupid admirals who accepted it through, led by Beatty. Thomas Collins, do you see I've answered this question already, to becoming more likely if we get investment in form of unmanned sensor drones to surface supplement to supplement surface escorts and submarines. It's going to add to it, but I also see that being as a problem. It's going to increase the detection range and increase the amount of information you're gathering when you have added in drones. But then you're probably going to get the submarines having on drones. In the nicest way, my view of AUKUS is it's probably going to, if it's not got a facility for supporting the launch and recovery of undersea drones to as for basically a force multiplier, then it's a bad design. I honestly do not see the point of having such a scenario if it doesn't have that capability. But there are problems in coordinating with those things. My Valerians totally do. Any enzyme bonded concrete fans in chat? November 30. Actually, that's more up my sister's street because my sister is her PhD's in geotechnical civil engineering, and her best friend is has done a concrete specialist. She's called Diana Petrolka, I think. Anyway, Diana's at Kingston University and does all sorts of things in concrete. And if you want to look her up and look up her research, I'm sure you'll be interested in it if you're interested in enzyme bonded concrete. You had a resin printer advertisement. Cool. Someday, if I have the money, I want to get one of those so I can start making props for my teaching. Craig H. I think many smaller vessels forward-based in allied ports around the world would argument a task force needed in a hurry. There are good ideas for that, and I think someone just had a question which was about. Oh yeah, Craig H. Should the Royal Navy have, say, 12 general-purpose corvettes, perhaps like the Israeli SAR-6, for coastal defence to deter Russian ships sabotaging underwater cables? Not really. That's what the Type 31 and 32s are for. And the reason the Royal Navy is going slightly larger and for that sort of thing, to going basically to a light frigate rather than a corvette, is because of operating in the North Sea, North Atlantic. You have to remember the advantage for the Israelis is they're operating in the Mediterranean. If you want to operate with most modern equipment in sort of North Sea, North Atlantic, and especially in the Falklands and other areas Britain's responsible for, you're going to need something a bit bigger, a bit more capable of taking the issues on and dealing with the issues, and in terms of the ocean around it. And you have to remember you need a certain level of stability, a certain level of a certain level of mass to support the systems inside it. And actually, the biggest argument I found against my idea, which is the future of Flower class equivalent will be an uncrewed vessel, is that at a certain point you're going to be to build a vessel which is able to take necessary systems that you need for processing information, for gathering information and sensors and the weapon systems, because of their delicacy and the effect of the motion of the ocean on them, etc. You need to build a vessel of sufficient size that it's going to be very difficult to justify not having some kind of crew on it. At which point you come up with basically the idea of a kernel of a crew, whereby the crew are operate in terms of warfighting from a heavily armoured box inside the vessel, and are running the vessel from in there, and that box has a lifeboat function in that it can be pushed away from the vessel and can motor its way home safely if they're attacked and the vessel's sunk. So that's sort of possibly more of a likelihood, where you have a crew of about. Well, let's put it this way: there are people then to go, "Oh, you can do that with just a group of 3 people," and I go, "So that means you want to have 20? You're going to have them up for 24 hours a day? No, you can't have one person up, then just be relying on one person on duty at any one point. You're going to have to have 3." So that means if they're going to be 24 hours a day for a few good for months on end, you're probably going to need at least 12 crew aboard. Plus, you're going to need someone who's going to be looking after the cooking and the food and making sure the logistics is okay. You're going to need a commanding officer. You might well want a medic, and you might want some marines. And also, what happens if you have UAVs operating from that vessel as well? You're then going to need some people to operate them and maintain them. So very quickly, you end up with a crew size of probably about 30 to 40. Which is still a massive reduction over a modern frigate or destroyer. But yeah, that's that's what a lot of thinking has been going on. Nick Danger, who invented ASDIC? It was invented by committee. Basically, there was a scientific committee set up during World War One to try and solve the problem of submarines, and ASDIC comes about from it. It's produced the Board of Invention Research, and Robert William Boyle is the guy who takes the lead of it, along with another guy called A.B. Wood. They were part of the anti-submarine division of the British Naval Staff, and so ASDIC actually stands for Anti-Submarine Division, and usually initially they used supersonic. So they were calling themselves the Anti-Submarine Division Supersonics. That's what they're developing, and that becomes ASDIC. But traditionally, in 1939, and this is the fun thing, when the OED, the Oxford English Dictionary, asked for a what ASDIC stood for, not wanting to sound stupid and say that their sailors had just shortened something, they came up with, it stood for Anti-Submarine Detection Investigation Committee. No committee actually bearing this name seems to turn up in the archives, but as said, there was the British Board of Invention Research, which was a committee, and there is the Anti-Submarine Division, which does have a leadership committee, which were involved in it. So there are committees involved, and it does come up through scientific committee and research, but it's not the committee which came up with it. That's often named. That's supposed to be named for. Okay. I don't know. Let's see. What questions have I got to have missed? 85. Is it revealed which nuclear submarine will be Australia getting? I heard they'll get the old US nuclear sub, but how about new built ones? New built ones will be AUKUS, so they will probably be. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they end up being closer to the Royal Navy's design than the American design, US Navy's design. They're gonna be from the same technology group because they're all working together on it. But they probably will end up closer to the Royal Navy design than the US design, and I wouldn't be surprised if they end up with Royal Navy power plants, just from the crewing reasons, because the crewing requirements of US submarines versus Royal Navy submarines is very different. Matthew Blends, is a Type 32 just to put a tongue by Boris Johnson? No. Basically, Type 31, as I've discussed on Build Trumps before, 32 is the Type 31 modified. So basically, my view is that the Type 32 will be a modified Type 31, modified to basically be a drone mothership. And support drones and support operations of them. Especially, it's going to be a transition period. Guys, while frigates and are cruisers, will we see DGSI's ASW orientated vessels like sprints and Udala classes? Honestly, frigates and destroyers are both cruisers. Modern escorts, larger escorts, are increasingly doing the cruiser role. You're not going to see more war-orientated, less cruising-orientated ships until you get people have a shock to their system. They're not building war fleets. They haven't been building war fleets for a long time. They've got the technologies and capabilities, but I'd argue they're built for a world where you don't have the same risks. They're not built for a world of peer-on-peer conflicts. And I'd argue even the Russian and the Chinese fleets, when you look at them, suffer from similar issues. They might not look like it, but they do once you start looking beneath the surface. Because most of these navies are being based on each other's capabilities, not looking at the capabilities they need for a war. Thoughts on the USA using LCS for littoral combat ships for anti-submarine warfare? Roll on the Constellations. They're okay, but roll on the Constellations. Well, the Type 26 is the brand new one being designed. The Type 23 are the Perry's equivalents, and frankly they were just as good as them, if not slightly better, because they were slightly more orientated around ASW. And the Type 21s were probably not as good as the Perry's. But the 23s are built later than the Perrys, so they should be better because they're built better later. And the Royal Navy's far more of an ASW-focused navy than the USN was. The USN was more generous at that point, and the Perry class have a better air defense fit because of that. And the Type 26 is not doesn't exist during the Cold War. The Type 26 is under construction right now. So yeah, the Type 26 should be better than the Perrys because they're about 40 years younger in terms of technology and development. The Soviets didn't just try that submarine. Thomas, you're talking about the Akula class, if I remember correctly. Yeah, they have. Oh, no, it wasn't the Akulas, was it? It was the. It was the F one, wasn't it? No, I think it was the. Or was it the Alphas? It was the Alphas, wasn't it? Yes, the Alphas. The Alphas, which had a complement of 31. And yeah, they worked quite well. In fact, they were probably the scariest vessels that the Royal Navy and the US Navy had to construct, although they were the 41 knot submerged vessels, which the Royal Navy immediately turned around and went, yeah, so we're building a torpedo which does 70 knots. Good luck to you. Take care, Tanif. Ken Ray, thoughts on SN versus AIP equipped SK versus XLUV for ASW? Where are you doing it, and what are you doing it for? Because if you're working in the Baltic or the Mediterranean, you're probably looking at AIP SSK or XLUV. If you're looking at it in North Atlantic, high up in the high Arctic and or the Pacific, you're probably going to go with an SSN. It's going to depend on the mission area. This is the problem today. I would argue, though, that if you look at it for coastal defense, etc., I would argue that both the US Navy and the Royal Navy, they have decided to go that if they have XLUUVs and SSNs, they don't need to have the AIP SSKs. They can afford to. You don't need to have all three systems. You can have the other two are enough coverage that they can cover it. Or they can give you the capability. They're pretty good. Are there is there any news on the shipyards expanding? In terms of AUKUS, there hasn't been much of things, but honestly, one of the things you have to remember is the British submarine construction facility is woefully underutilized. It has like 2 extra slip spaces it could use, and they haven't been being used. So there's not much work needed. And also, my suspicion for AUKUS is what will happen is that the reactor modules will get built in the UK and taken out to Australia, and the rest will be built in Australia. The systems might well be manufactured in America or Britain, but they'll all be assembled in Australia. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the system for AUKUS. But I talked about that. We talked about that on bilge pumps. I talked this through with Drakenfell and Jamie Seedale, and it was all discussed on bilge pumps. So if you want to go look at that, those videos are going to be, and those recordings are going to be back up soon, probably on Drax website and channel. Ramon, logical thought on USN, Royal Navy, French Navy, and Russian Navy, future Chinese Navy, and Australian Navy. Their logic in having SSNs, the theatre they operate in, or what they're going to operate in. Yeah. Honestly, SSNs are about logistics. They are able to take usually devote more space to food, and so therefore you're able to increase range that way. But also tend to have a higher transit speed. And so you can transit to your location more quickly, which means that you lose up less food transiting. And this is important for people like the Australians, etc. If they want to be able to forward defend themselves and forward secure themselves, they need to be able to move forward quite a long distance, because Australia is frigging thousands of miles from anywhere that matters. And one of the interesting things was the reason why they ended up going the French submarine they did originally, which was a conversion of an SSN to an SSK design, was literally none of the submarines available, none of the conventional submarines available, were actually able to do the ranges required. And as time went on, the French kept downgrading the range and kept increasing the amount of stuff which had to be built in France versus built in Australia. The promise when it was sold to the Australians was it had to be built, or was all going to be built in Australia. And then it gets less and less. They keep passing stuff off to be built in France or in Australia, and they keep talking down its capabilities from what it was sold of. And eventually, the Australians go, "Well, we should have just gone nuclear in the first place." And I would say it's a kind of both sides, a plague on both sides, because the French were quite honest with the Australians that they were selling them not yet developed technology. They were selling them potential. It potentially can do this. And were basing it on the idea that the Australians' claims of how skilled their workforce were. And then as they were doing it, the French found out how unskilled the Australian how much the Australian government had allowed the Australian workforce to de-skill, to lose its capabilities, and also found out that their ideas for what might work wouldn't work. But the Australians were also quite right in that the French had promised X and Y, and they were failing to deliver it. But the thing is, they could never deliver it, because what the Australians were looking for was an SSK with the operating characteristics of an SSN, and you can't get that. You can't get that today. You couldn't get that at any point. They're very different styles of boats. Are we looking at UUVs becoming a dominant option for littoral coastlines defences? I wouldn't be surprised if we see them becoming a core part of it. Also, there's some advantages if you're using XL UUVs and UUVs in your coastlines. There are underwater communication systems which can theoretically transmit more information, but they're usually transmitted from fixed locations under the sea. And so you could theoretically set up systems whereby you could coordinate them underwater. They're not usually that long ranged, so that's going to be sort of factored into your SOSUS line or whatever you have if you do that. But those systems, again, they're open. You can go if you want to have an interesting, fun read. Type in "communicating with submarines" into Google and just see all those results that come up. Well, the current Royal Australian Navy Collins can operate coast to coast in Australian waters without going coast to surface refueling. No. Don't forget his dinner, otherwise he'll be upset with you. If there's nothing left in there, he probably wants more. But I found about that bowl was half full when I picked it up, so I didn't pour extra food in there. He hadn't eaten yesterday's. No, man. He won't be upset with you. Your mother will be upset with you. Why? Because he won't have any food. Well, he has got food. The bowl was half full when I picked it up. It hadn't been all eaten yesterday. So I didn't want to overface him. Sorry. Debates about dog food. Night, Raleigh. Come on, re-SSN SSK versus SN. And if you get a torpedo after you, SNs have a slightly better chance of outrunning it. Depends which torpedoes after them. Depends which torpedoes after them. Basically laughing in Royal Navy here. Just try it. Please go to top speed. Yeah. There were a lot of problems in that whole program for the French and the Australians. There were really a lot of problems for both of them. Now, what I will say is I'll be answering questions for about another 20 minutes, and then I will go on to Discord. So there's a tribute link to the Discord server somewhere around here. If you want to come join us in the chat, you're more than welcome to, and I chat away and answer questions. There's usually Masters at Arms there, they are kind of like Discord admins. I have 2 levels of admins. I have flotilla leaders and Masters at Arms. Master at Arms are usually people who most often are available are in the chat, and they are there to basically make sure people are being nice and polite to each other and respectful in the chat. And in terms of you can have an argument, you can debate anything you want to in terms of the topic we've discussed that evening, and ask questions, and I'll answer them when I can, all these things. But To make sure people don't talk over each other so we can actually have a sensible conversation and those things, there are Masters Arms. And then there are Flotilla leaders. And between those two groups, they keep the Discord server really nice and a really friendly atmosphere. And that's what we do. Not sure if Australia has SOSUS to detect submarines, but if not, they should prioritise. Yeah, there's lots of things the Australians need to prioritise. Mines, mine laying capability. That's another thing you can really talk about in terms of naval warfare. Mine laying becomes very, very important when anyone's approaching a war, and you can tell when they haven't been involved in a war for a long time because they won't have virtually any mine laying capability. Is there a mighty fluff trying to get in here? No, he needs to go pee. Okay. Sorry, there was a corgi. There was a corgi trying to make a break for corgi treats. November 30th. Is trying independence a problem if relations break down between US and UK? Not really. No. I don't see relations breaking down to that level, but B, the Trident program is pretty darn independent. The British command and control system is sufficiently separate and sufficiently different from the Americans that the Americans actually hate the British system. They have no idea why the British have the faith in it they do. The British are very happy with it. By the way, for those who don't realise, the British command and control system is basically letters in the stored in a safe of the submarine captain's cabin, basically. And in it, there's a letter from the Prime Minister which basically says, if you lose contact, this is what you do. There are systems to send out instructions to fire, but again, submarine has to be at the right surface for them, right depth for them to detect it. So, you know, there's limitations on that. The actual Trident system itself, Trident doesn't use GPS to navigate. There are some really interesting ideas about that. They fix themselves using star positions and all sorts of things, and they are pre-programmed. The main problem comes with the fact that we share warhead servicing with the French, and we share the rocket servicing with the Americans. So we would potentially have to set up our own rocket servicing system. And the thing is, we have all the people who have all the skills. We have enough British people who are involved in the program. We do maintain that. So we would need to build a facility. We could do that. We choose not to. It's kind of like the system, like the problems you have, the whole system we have with the anti-submarine warfare control system, etc., getting moved from St Morgan in Cornwall to America and all combined in on that. The British government have consistently made the idea of we'll maintain the people, but not the actual physical hardware because that's cheaper for us. It's an issue. It's an issue. It basically means governments have to spend money. If they want independence and freedom of action, they need to spend money on it. But yeah, it's not one of those things of there are some really silly things which go on around British nuclear deterrent. One of the things I always find is we share warhead servicing with the French, and no one goes, "Oh, you're dependent upon the French. They could stop you firing your weapons." And you go, "No." Talk about the Americans and the Trident. The blooming nuclear warheads are being shared with the French. And again, it's joints. It's the joy of the world, basically. Would generally not navies be most in need of mine laying capability? Germany, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Britain, Australia. Pretty much everyone's in need of mine laying capability, because have a look at nations and have a look at how much you actually have mine laying capability currently. Other than airdropped mines, which are useful in some regards, but honestly, if you want to be accurate about their positioning and want to create a minefield that you can navigate through, you probably want to have them sea deployed. Also, Ramal, also for the Orca submarine SSN, which torpedo would the SSN have, and would the SSN be equipped with VLS like Virginia? Probably will have VLS, because the British next generation submarine is going to have VLS. Finally, we seem to have moved away from the idea that our nuclear subs SSN shouldn't have it. But honestly, they haven't made that decision yet on the torpedo. They have not made that decision. So, yeah. Does the UK have mine laying capability? Aerial mine laying capability. I think there are theoretical capacities for our mine hunting vessels, but I think that's it pretty much. Yeah, Verdun, it's just the way sterilizing when one nuke each other. Although, yes, there is a good argument of why certain things have nukes. Squire, in the pre-USS Nautilus era, no. Our initial UK post-war led us to take a risky look at developing hydrogen peroxide propulsion. No. It was risky, but it also eventually led down many interesting routes. One of the things you have to remember, hydrogen peroxide propulsion was about getting a very fast torpedo. The British have always been obsessed with a very fast torpedo, and if you want to know the history that comes back to, it comes back to some of the problems in World War One, where ships actually outran British torpedoes. So then the British have become obsessed ever since with making a fast torpedo. It is no surprise the British have the fastest torpedo in the world currently in service. It's quite simple. The British have been obsessed with it since World War One, when some I think it was actually, was it, who was it? It was German vessels managed to outrun some torpedoes launched by one of their ships. That happens. Taken from Haynes in the astute class. VLS bad as it makes more holes in the pressure hull. Launched via torpedo tubes, and for torpedo tubes 20 inch diameter probably. Yeah, yes and no. That was the traditional view. Reality is they're not going to worry about that anymore. They're going probably with a system which is going to be not have holes in the pressure hull, because you can. If we go back to this picture of the astute class, back here, you can see there's the outer hull, and inside that's the pressure hull. So if if considering how fat modern SSNs are getting, you can design things so that you don't pierce the pressure hull if you want to, in terms of VLS systems. The reason Mark 48 Spearfish is the alphas. Yeah, pretty much. But also the Royal Navy's ever-questing desire to, we want the world's fastest torpedo. Singapore actually has something of a mine-laying capability, but they're about the only ones of that group which do. She's not fat, she's just big bulged. Yeah. Dan Freeman, you can claim that if you want to. But it's more than that. Yeah, basically the Royal Navy didn't like VLS. The Royal Navy, you have to remember, the Americans are building, especially their Virginias, as all-around vessels, and in some ways are very much focused on being all-around vessels, and to try and make up for the fact they don't want to build more SSGNs. They don't want to. What I would say perfectly sensible would be to take the first 4 of the Columbia class and convert them into SSGNs after you've built enough as SSBNs. But they don't want to do that. They want to put that capability onto their SSNs, and that's why they're building the Virginias like they are. For the Royal Navy, their attack subs are very much hunter-killers. You have to consider the Royal Navy's submarine force is more like Seawolf's design than the Virginia's. And if we remember correctly, the Seawolf, if I remember correctly, do they have VLS tubes? Yeah, they have the Seawolves only have VLS torpedo as well. So Seawolves don't have VLS as well. So that's the sort of scenario you're looking at. You're looking at a Seawolf style design, is how the British are orientated, rather than the Virginias. So the Virginias are these general purpose boats, and hence they have the Seawolf, or they have those things in. And yes, you're quite right. The Block 5s of the Virginias are designed to replace the Ohio SSGNs. Yeah. But the Royal Navy's Astutes are more designed on a similar philosophy as the Seawolves, which is one of the reasons why the Americans want to get did want to get into AUKUS as well, because their view is that AUKUS is going to be far closer to a Seawolf in its idea of because it's more of a peer versus peer submarine than the all-arounder which the Virginia is. Think about the Virginia as being, in many ways, the Los Angeles class to the Seawolf, the modern sort of replacement for that, sort of, or the R class battleship to the Queen Elizabeth class version of Seawolf. Dan Freeman, missiles outside. Yeah, but in practice, you don't service. You don't try and service missiles at sea in a submarine. The whole point is they're supposed to be sealed, and you don't muck around with them. Oh, the USNs would like to convert. So I think the USN realistically need to convert some of their first of the next generation of SSBNs into SSGNs, because that's a lot of capability to lose. Losing the ability to get a single boat into range and launching 154 tactical land attack missiles, that's a huge strike. That's a huge capability. The Yas and SSGNs carry their missiles outside the main pressure hull. Yeah. Wait, who's getting an AUKUS once in? The US, Australia, and UK are currently in AUKUS. I wouldn't be surprised if there are some other nations currently looking at potentially joining. There are some potential options. Also, not everyone wants to be in the AUKUS is about more than just the submarine program, although that's the headline-grabbing one. There's quite a few programs and missile systems being covered under AUKUS. So it's quite a wide-ranging contact, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see other nations want to get involved in that as time goes on. There is specifically, I could see AUKUS becoming potentially involving at least one other Five Eyes member at certain points. James, what makes submarines obsolete? If you truly do manage to make the sea transparent, so there's no advantage to being able to hide underwater. That, frankly, at that point, your only defense is the active defenses which you can get from which a surface vessel can carry far more easily than a submarine. Do I see that happening anytime soon? No. Unless there is a starting revelation in technology, I don't see that happening in the next 40, 50 years. No, they don't usually mistake tactical missiles for ICBM launch, but it's the problem when you're talking about anti-ship ballistic missiles and people going, these are a threat to modern ships. And you go, well, yeah, the trouble is your anti-ship ballistic missiles are based on similar profiles and similar systems to your ballistic missiles, your strategic ballistic missiles of some level, and at the moment you start launching those, people tend to get very nervous and start talking about nuclear weapons and strategic attacks. And that could lead to someone, let's say, if you've got someone who's trigger happy in your opponent, who's a trigger happy, who's at the head of your opponent's government, maybe launching their ballistic missiles because they think you're trying a sneak strike with your ballistic missiles, and yeah, that's a good way to find yourself in a nuclear exchange when you just wanted to attack a ship. There are a lot easier and a lot more sensible weapon systems to use. Those are what I would call classic headline-grabbing weapons. These are our super weapons. Actually using them is a big problem. Is it the building work that's delaying common response videos to key ship videos? To an extent, but also it's a case of I'm going to get the shorts running first, and I haven't yet managed to get the shorts running because of doing all the work in the house and keep having problems. It's getting the time to record the regular videos to the level I'm happy with, and then I want to start recording the streams. But also, I am, since coming back from pneumonia, I'm still needing to rest more. I'm not sleeping more. The pneumonia hasn't changed that about me. I still don't sleep that much. I'm still a functioning insomniac, but yeah, I do need to rest more. And so I have to... I'm getting better, but I have to still marshal my energy carefully. Well, UUV and unmanned maritime patrol aircraft are part of AUKUS. Yeah, they are. Pretty much, Ramon. Yeah, pretty much. So what is the ultimate defense system against submarines? Everything. There is no such thing as an ultimate defense system. There is a layered approach to defenses. We are going to have just like with air defense. The answer is you have a layered approach of weapon systems which you can strike submarines with at different ranges. You have a layered sensor system, and you compile that data, and that's how you do it. There is no... Very rarely in war and very rarely in history has there been such a thing as a golden BB, which makes a weapon system, completely irrelevant. It's always a case of building up and working to do it. Correct. I know you'd like 2 Trieste, but shouldn't we have 2 other small LHDs to replace Unblood Canagas? Would never know, but how do we prevent the loss of capability? I would say you would want 2 full-size Trieste to replace Albion and Bulwark, because you're adding it. You are replacing Albion, Bulwark, Ocean, Argus. You need at least 2 Trieste. I would prefer to have 3. And if you can have 3 Trieste to back up the 2 Queen Elizabeths, you'd have a very good force structure to build and operate around, especially once you've got the Bay class and their successors, the MSS vessels in service. But, it's fun. It's fun getting it through. Because the trouble is, and this is the problem when it comes to making the case to treasuries and when it comes to making the case, usually you're making the case not for a system, but for a system of systems. And it's often going, well, so I buy this kit and that solves my problem? No. You have to buy this kit, this kit, this kit, and all of these things, and together they work to solve the problem. So I can't just buy one thing to solve? No, you can't. You need a system of systems. That sounds expensive. It is expensive. But it's the way it works. Because it's the way it works in reality. It's very rarely, the thing I usually point out is, Mike, you can say the computer is one system, right? But it's not. It's got the processor, which is a system of itself. It's got the graphics card. It's got the hard drives. It's got the motherboard. It's got all these things. So in many ways, it's a system of systems. But it looks to you like you're buying one system. But the trouble is for armed forces, when I'm saying I'm not going to buy 100 of these, I'm not buying 100 task groups. I have to buy them as individual ships. And that's the trouble when it comes to selling it and explaining it. No, Doc, I'm referring to the high-tech peroxide as an alternative to nuclear submarine plant. Oh yeah, those subs were fun. They were very interesting, but they were fun. They were absolutely bonkers, but in the nicest way. In 1945, in that period, you build those things because you don't have the computer software to test it out, and if it had worked, it could have been an interesting alternative, not necessarily to a nuclear submarine. It's often... I can understand there are reports where it's considered an alternative to nuclear submarine plant, but it wasn't. Actually, it was the British trying to work out whether they can make an SSK equivalent. That would be basically powered by that. Because they wanted to make the next generation of SSKs for powers which wouldn't be able to support nuclear power. Because you have to remember, the Royal Navies at the time are what you're talking about. And at very much that period, you're talking about the Royal Navy, the Royal Australian Navy, the Royal Canadian Navy. And whilst the Royal Navy knew it was probably going to get nuclear-powered submarines and would have the ability to do that, it didn't trust that the Australians and Canadians and other powers within the Commonwealth would actually have the money to do that. So the Royal Navies was going, well, we'll invest in this and then we'll have these. And that's one of the reasons why the British keep the SSK program going as long as they do, is to try and support the SSK programs in the other Royal Navies. November 30th. Are the Ascension Islands, a place like that, still as important as they were logistically? Yeah. Because you still need airfields and you still need places you can pull ships into to resupply them at certain points, and they're useful for that. So yes, they're still there. They're not major coaling stations, but yeah, they're still. Falkland Islands has fuel dumps and ammunition stores down there and all sorts of things, and that's the same. Ascension can also be used, kind of stuff flown into it to be put onto a border ship. So yeah, these things still useful, still critically useful. Yeah. Matthew Darren, that was a long time ago. Yeah, November 30th, that's I'm not getting into that on here. I've already said stuff about that in the past. I'm not getting into that one again. I don't agree with it. I think it was stupid, and I think it was given over to the wrong people, but we'll leave that to one side. Traditionally, those islands were administered through India, not Mauritius. They've been given to Mauritius. Was the argument was we making the most noise going over the population they've taken of the Chagosian, but that it should be given to Chagosans if it was going to be given to someone other than India. But realistically, they were administered through British India, so that's who they should have probably been handed to. But yeah, it's just mad. Potentially 96A for one, but we'll never know unless we work that one through. Well, most countries that are scared of submarines bought Poseidon or other MMR patrol and ASW Helios to counter. Germans are buying P8s now. Yeah, because they're a good thing. Although I would say if I was providing aircraft for the Baltic and Mediterranean, I'd be tempted by the P1s of the Japanese more than P8s, because the P8s are great for the Atlantic. They are great for those the big range and operating at. I would say for P1s. Hello. I can't pronounce. My acrylic pronunciation is terrible, so I'm just going to say hello. Matthew Lawrence, is the Royal Navy cautious about F-35 capable LHDs in case the Treasury gets funny ideas? More than likely. That you have to remember the original plan was that, and now the LHDs have completely disappeared from the plan. So yeah, that's the basic problem. Yeah, you won't see, Clarke. There is nothing. The MSS isn't even constructing. None of the systems which are supposed to replace the LLPDs are in construction. So yeah, that's a big problem to me, as well. Oh, main problem with building subs nowadays, SSKs or SNs, is logistics and qualified welders. Yeah, that's why the British have developed some automatic welding systems, and they're doing pretty darn well. But they are massive, and that's the reason why actually the British government bought a steel company not so long ago. Dan Freeman, not coaling stations anymore? No. Seneca Nera, if the Colombian cartels can build submarines, not submersible, they now build full-on submarines. I'm not sure. You can claim they're full-on submarines, they're not probably. No, I can't add YouTube subscribers and Twitch followers for you, but no, she won't allow me to do that. It's just entirely YouTube subscribers. And P3Cs are still very much viable for the Baltics, yes. Ron, you have mac and cheese and eyebrow. You are a lucky person, and it's now been 3 hours, and I'm going to appear on Discord in a bit, but I'm going to go quickly check on the fluffs and check they're back where they're supposed to be. Thank you very much, everyone, for chatting away, and yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've found it interesting, and thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, and yeah, hope you enjoyed it on both on Twitch and on YouTube. Hope you had a nice time. Glad you like it, November 40. Basically, I do Brew Ships, which is a Q&A session every Sunday, and I do usually a topic video on a Thursday, And I do recorded videos out over a couple of days a week, a few days a week on currently every day of the week on YouTube. The recorded videos going up, or there's a live. And then on Twitch, I tend to do some gaming streams when I have more time. At the moment, I mean, currently had so many electricians and plumbers in this place, I haven't had the time for anything. We've completely rebuilt the heating system and the computer network and the electrics and everything for this property. So yeah, it's been fun. Anyone who's moved house and has arrived to realize they need that will know exactly what I'm talking about when I said, this house is not the same house we bought now. It is very different internally. Thank you very much, 85 Free. Thank you, November 30. Thank you, Dan Freeman, Raptor, HMS Ford, Cal McGasberg. Thank you, Runon. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, everyone who's been here. 96831. Thank you, Cray H. Thank you, everyone who's been here and chatting. And do I play Rule the Waves free? Not yet. Fleet of Oceans tends to play that. I do UAD, Ultimate Admiral Dreadnoughts, on a Sunday morning, and I'm going to probably play the modern one soon, and I've got a few other games that I play, and I tend to also do some relaxed chill streams when I'm just playing Timberborn, because I can answer questions quite easily while playing Timberborn, and when I'm having a bit of a rest in the evening after a busy day, it's a nice thing to do. Thank you very much, James C. Stanley and Ramal. Thank you very much, everyone, and take care, and hope you enjoyed. Night-night, and I'll be on Discord in a bit. Thank you, Discord. Thank you, everyone.